All right. We are going to start the City of Iowa City Work Session for May 16th, 2023. And I want to make sure that Councilor Don can hear us and we can hear him.
I can hear you. Thank you.
Awesome. Welcome. And welcome to councilors and everyone here in the audience. We're going to go to our first agenda item, evaluate the feasibility and funding sources needed for a zero-fare transit system. And Darian is just going to jump on up here. So welcome.
Good evening. Afternoon, I suppose. Not quite there yet, but we're getting there. Hello, Mayor, councilors. Very excited to be here tonight to talk about transit. All right. Rachel, I may need your help with the projector.
And we see it up here.
We can see it here,
You can
Darian,
see it?
so if
Okay.
you can see it,
Oh,
go.
Great, I can see it. Again, I'm Darian Nagel-Gam, Director of Transportation Services. Very happy to be here tonight to provide an update on the status of transit service and talk about the future of transit service. Tonight's agenda, just going to give you a brief high-level 101 service summary. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the operational challenges we've been experiencing. We're going to rewind a little bit, talk about some of our recent transit service improvements, up to and including yesterday. We had some changes yesterday, so we'll have some very fresh changes to talk about. And then we'll talk a little bit about transit service enhancements, and those are those vision items that we have been sort of evaluating since the transit study came out. We originally evaluated 10 different ones, and the council kind of narrowed that focus down to 3. So we'll talk about zero fare, which will be the headliner tonight. We'll talk about Sunday service, and we'll talk about late night on-demand service. And of course, no transit service enhancement discussion is complete without talking about transit funding. So that's going to be a very important piece of our discussion this evening. And then we're going to follow up with some discussion about staff recommendation and what those next steps might be. All right, first and foremost, our mission. So Iowa City Transit's mission is to make transit more dependable for those that rely on it every day and make it really an easier choice for others. Welcome more people to transit, make it work for a better and greater number of our community members. We are always on a mission to improve our reliability, affordability, accessibility, safety, of course, sustainability, and we want to make it as equitable of access for everyone in the community as we can. All right, high-level service summary. So how do we provide that service to the community? So we have 13 routes, 6 days a week. The routes are the same no matter the time of day or day of week. That's a recent enhancement. We provide service from about 6 a.m. to around 10:45, 11 p.m. at night. So that's about 17 hours on the weekdays, 12 hours on Saturdays. Our fare is $1 currently. We do have reduced fare options, including a reduced fare 31-day pass. Our service is free for those that are 65 and up, which is great. Those that have qualified disabilities also ride transit for free. It's half price for youth, free for Medicare or Seats card holders. And then the downtown shuttle, for as long as I can remember, is a free service. So that has always been free. We also offer paratransit operations along with our fixed route service. That service is contracted through Johnson County Seats. Those rides are $2 for qualified riders. All right, so how do we provide this service? So the fixed routes, of course, the paratransit is door-to-door service depending on location, but the fixed routes are on, as they say, a fixed route. And this is a map of our current routes across the community, including some of the changes that we made to the North Dodge route and the northernmost route in the bright green. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But these are all a result of the Iowa City Area Transit Study, and these are all part of the major overhaul that we did in 2020 and 2021. All right, let's talk about staffing. So it takes 63 employees to operate our transit system on a daily basis, and that includes 2 transit administrators. That's myself and Mark Rummel. We have 3.5 supervisors. We also have 2 parking supervisors that are under the Transportation Services umbrella, and we do rely on them heavily, and especially during these major transit system changes. They've been instrumental in helping as well. So I don't want to leave their names out. We have 47 mass transit operators. That's our budgeted number. That's 22 full-time and 25 three-quarter time. That those three-quarter time positions are necessary because we have such an odd number of service hours, and it helps us provide that coverage through the heavier peak hours. We have 4 mechanics on staff to help keep the buses rolling every day. We have 4 maintenance workers that help us turn the buses over at night to help make sure they're clean and presentable for the morning and all fueled up, ready to go first thing. We also have a new management analyst position who just, I think, 5 months now on staff, very talented and has been extraordinarily helpful both on the transit side and the parking side of the house. And we have a program assistant position that we'll be filling in the near future to help with all of the things that we have going on at transit, which is quite a bit. All right, this slide I'm very excited about. So this is Iowa City Transit ridership, and I'm going to just kind of walk you through really briefly where things are at. But this is really a high-level overview since 2000. So you can see from 2000 to about 2008, which was sort of at our peak during the Great Recession, if you remember. Transit ridership across the country really spiked then. And I would say we've remained fairly steady for the next few years after that till about 2015. Then we started to see a little bit of a dip. I attribute that to the rise of ride-hailing services that became so easy to call up with the smartphone. Gas prices also really started to decline about that point. So I don't think we could point to any one factor, but I think those two were definitely parts of that decline between 2015 and then 2019. And of course, as you see highlighted on here, the pandemic, and that really did a number on our ridership, and here in Iowa City, across the metro area, and really across the country. So we went from 1.4 million riders per year right before the pandemic to a low of about 500,000 riders during 2021. We've rebounded a bit in FY22 to 850,000, and we're really excited to say that the forecast for this year looks like we're going to clear 1.1 million, which is more of a mental thing for any of us in transit. We're really excited to clear that mark again because it's been a bit of an unknown. We're not sure how new commuting patterns are going to shake out, and if what percentage of people are going to come back to transit, but we're really excited to keep moving the ridership needle up, and some of the enhancements we'll talk about later I think could really boost that. So how do those numbers translate to the rest of the country? I love to include this, especially in all of our grant applications. It's in every one of them as many times as I can mention it. But Iowa City area ranks 21st in the nation in per capita ridership. So we have been on this list for some time. This is actually probably the lowest that we've been on this list. I think we've been as high as 11th in the nation. And that just shows the strength of our transit systems, the long, proud history we have with transit use in the community. And so I really like to highlight that as a success, always. Even when this was an FY21, that was our lowest transit ridership we've had in a very long time. So it's something we're always looking to see how we can move up on this list, get more people on board, but we're coming from a great place, and we're coming from a community that's really supportive of transit. So it's a great news story. All right, ridership by month. So I just want to just give you a real quick glance as to how our ridership moves with the seasons. You probably could have expected this graph to look this way. So because we're so into the flow with the university traffic and how people ebb and flow with the university calendar, you can see the spring, you can definitely see a pronounced spring semester and a pronounced fall semester. In FY22, our highest ridership was about 91,000. In July, it was 44,000. So it varies between those amounts, generally speaking. And again, this was FY22. The next slide here, this is just a glimpse as to what our ridership looks like by day of the week. I just compared FY19 because that was our last pre-pandemic year we had with FY22, which is our last full year's worth of data we have. But I think this, it shows, ridership was definitely down. So before this year, we're coming out of that. We're coming out of that pandemic dip. It was hovering about 43% below our pre-pandemic levels. We're actually now, I think we're going to finish the year in the high 20s, maybe 26, 27% below pre-pandemic levels. So we're definitely crawling out of that. But one good news story here, one story this slide tells me is that no matter what our overall ridership levels are doing, things are pretty consistent on a daily basis, as you can see. So it's pretty consistent Monday through Thursday. Friday, slight dip. Saturday goes very far down. If you looked across all of our years, it's going to look very similar to that. Saturday ridership is only 6% of our total weekly ridership. Sunday ridership, if we had a Sunday ridership on here, I would expect to see that it would be half of the Saturday ridership. That's usually what you can expect on Sundays. That's a pretty kind of standard industry. It varies a little bit between communities, but I would say it would probably be about half of that amount if we had Sunday service ridership here to report. All right, ridership by route. So we've ranked these, each one of our 13 routes by ridership, and you can see at the very top end, the South Iowa City, the Lower Muscatine, the West Iowa City, and the Oak Crest are by far the top performers. South Gilbert, East Side Loop, Peninsula, and North Dodge, those are our lowest performers in terms of ridership. We do have a few in the middle that we're watching very, very cautiously and carefully now. We're very excited to see what happens. The 2 Court Street and the 9 Town Crest, beginning yesterday, we just began 20-minute service on these 2 routes. They had 30-minute service before, so we're really interested in seeing what these changes do to ridership. Of course, all of the changes to the system that we did as part of the big transit study, we weren't able to evaluate really how any of those individually worked definitively because of the pandemic. So this will be the first changes that we're making where we can measure the impact that we're going to see to ridership. So we're really carefully watching the Court Street and Town Crest and see how they might move in this list. All right, operational challenges, and I think I highlighted some of these at the budget work session in January, but staffing in general has been a challenge in having adequate staff, being able to hire adequate staff to cover unplanned absences, to plan and execute service improvements like what we did yesterday. We're having hiring pools that are greatly diminished. We are leaving postings open, and we'll go a long time before we even get an application. And this is an unusual state for us to be in. We've had a pretty consistent supply of interested parties over the years, so it's definitely been a challenge. That coupled with we've got an aging workforce, and the need for time off has been increasing. So we kind of have these 2 things happening at the same time. That's been a real challenge for us.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So you have 47 mass transit operators.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what your staffing ratios would be? How many staff do you need to make it all work?
So ideally, the council gratefully approved 4 additional 3/4 time staff, so part-time staff for us last August. And we used that number to help design the transit system the tweaks that we rolled yesterday. So in theory, our budgeted number, we provide the service to the budgeted number that we have, if that makes sense. What is an unknown variable for us is when people get sick and or there's long-term unexpected absences. It becomes a real challenge for us. And the big problem is that if we're not like other we don't have other jobs that we can, if we're overstaffed, I guess, but what I'm trying to say is if we have too much staff and then we don't have enough hours for that staff to drive, then that becomes a problem too. So we have to ride a really razor thin edge in transit. We don't have other projects we can assign people to, if we just happen to have no sick calls for a week, which would be amazing. But, so the number that we proposed last August was the number that we thought we would need in order to put together to compensate for unplanned absences to the best that we could and also plan for those service enhancements that we rolled out yesterday. If we have more staff, we could improve services. Say, for example, increasing the frequency of service on some of the buses, but at some point, we're going to need more buses too. So that is a very not clean answer for your question.
I understand it
It's a
fully.
very,
Thank you.
it's kind of it's a moving target for us, and we try to get as close to
Sure.
having a number where we feel comfortable, but then it's just dependent on the status, the health, well-being of our team. You know, retirements, unexpected retirements, unexpected long absences. Yeah.
Kind of on those lines, I've known a few people who've been transit drivers, and they would talk about the trippers. Now, do you still utilize those? Are those the three-quarter timers that'll go out to meet the buses and to let those transit drivers go on their meal breaks and those kinds? How do you deal with that with your
Yes.
numbers?
Yes, so we have what we call as extra board drivers, and all of our new drivers, through the union agreement, we have a seniority-based system, so all of our new drivers begin as, I think it's like a tripper, but we call them extra board drivers, and they have they have a very flexible schedule, so their schedules are very dependent on that week's needs, and they do go relieve drivers if necessary. They do bus switches if necessary, so it's very we try to target a certain number of hours, but the schedule isn't necessarily set. That's all of our newest drivers start in those positions, and then they work their way seniority-wise into selecting runs, if you will, which is more of a set schedule and certain routes. If that describes that a little better for you. Yeah. So safety is another challenge that we've been talking about, increasingly talking about in recent years. And I think I've mentioned managing passenger conflicts at the fare box is always a challenge. The mask mandate, being responsible for ensuring everybody was wearing a mask was a real challenge. And that was, we were happy to do it, and we wanted everybody to ride safely. Our drivers wanted everybody to be on board safely, but that was a real challenge. So we have had some of those conflicts decrease. But we have just generally seen an increase in disruptive and aggressive behavior from the public, and it's a minority of the public, I will say. It is not everybody on the bus. It's just a small number of people. But verbal assaults are becoming increasingly common. In fact, that's not just here, it's everywhere. Federally, we've just recently been required, and I'm talking within the last month, because of this uptick, to report all verbal assaults on the bus, and whether that's directed at, I think it's only if they're directed at the driver. Sometimes there's passenger-to-passenger conflicts too. But that is not an uncommon thing for our drivers to have to deal with, is to just deal with some back and forth with not happy customers, especially when there's either conflict at the fare box or they have to enforce some of our rules so that everybody can ride peacefully. Physical assaults are thankfully much less common, but they have occurred, and that is something that's just a concern for staff always. We have some staff that I think is more comfortable in addressing some of the rules of being on board than others, because there's just, I think, that fear of a potential, conflict, or just a fear of retribution, or just generally, I would say, an increase in fearfulness.
Is there any pattern like to that in terms of the time of day or day of the week?
I'm trying to think if I can discern a pattern off the top of my head based on the incidents as I become aware of them, and I feel like they're all times of day. We could do some deeper analysis, and actually part of our new federal reporting kind of requires that we do that, so that's something we could certainly get back to you on, and something that we should evaluate. We do have calls that happen later at night, maybe that could be alcohol fueled. We do have some that happen in the middle of the day or in the morning too. So it's just, I think it's off the cuff, I would say it happens. Except for in the early morning hours, I don't know if we get a lot of incidents in the early morning hours. I think it's all other times of day seem to be fair game for these incidents.
My experience when riding the bus, not here but elsewhere, was evenings seemed to be more problematic. But
Yeah, that might fare itself out. We'll take a look at that. On-time performance issues is another operational challenge, and I am very happy to say that a lot of the changes we made yesterday were to address this specifically. So I was very short with this one. We'll report back, but so far things have looked really good in just the 2 days that we've been running some of those changes which were designed to fix this issue. I've been talking with you all about the condition of our buses and facilities for several years. You're all fairly aware of the age and condition of the transit facility, for example. But we do have older buses. The downtown interchange itself is not really it's not really hospitable to passengers. There's not good cover. There's not good seating. The annex that's down there, which is a small break room that's attached to the mall, that was built into the public right-of-way, is in poor condition, and it was a real challenge during the pandemic. It is very small, and there's 2 restrooms in a very small room with a refrigerator and a couple places to sit. And it's even though we have rotating meal breaks and schedules, it was impossible to keep any sort of reasonable distance in there. I mean, it's maybe our standards have changed a little bit, but it's definitely on our agenda to take a look at that facility and how else we might be able to provide better break facilities for our staff downtown. And then last but not least, in terms of condition, our bus stops. Just generally speaking, as part of the transit study, we hear it from the community, we can see it ourselves. As part of the transit study, it identified as an area of opportunity as our bus stops. We need to take a look at our bus stops. There's a lot of facilities that we could be adding to our bus stops to make them more safe and comfortable for our passengers. And they also we have nearly 500 stops. So as we add these facilities, that's going to take a lot of maintenance to make sure that they are maintained in a way that is safe and comfortable for the public too. So 2 things that are on our mind in terms of bus stops. And that's something that we're going to begin addressing in the next year by bringing a consultant in to help us make recommendations for each bus stop across the community, develop a plan, and then go and start making those improvements, including the downtown interchange.
Quick question for you before we get too far into this, and it's possible that I may have missed you addressing this, but early in your presentation you had, it was one of the first slides, you had a graphic that showed a downward trend for ridership starting, or at least maybe peaking in 2015. And I'm wondering if you guys have any broader understanding as to why ridership has been a downward trend since then. And again, apologies if I just missed that comment.
No, thank you. That's an excellent question. I think that it's multifaceted, the reasons, but 2 things stand out to me. The gas prices, if you look at the gas prices, after the Great Recession in 2008, there was a precipitous drop. So I think that's one factor, but then also we had the rise of ride-hailing services, app-based, really easy-to-use ride-hailing services. So I think those 2 things I would say, account for a good proportion of it. Maybe the general economy also afforded more people the ability to buy cars and pay for parking too. That's definitely a possibility, but the economy definitely improved. So those 3 factors are at the top of my list. All right, and the last operational challenge is electric buses. We're still learning. They have many positive benefits, and we'll talk a little bit more about those. But it is like learning a whole new language.
Spaceship.
Yes, exactly. It's learning to drive a spaceship. It's essentially it, and it's just everything from a troubleshooting perspective. I think the drivers have picked up on them pretty easily, but they do drive different. So it's definitely different from a driving perspective. If you've ever driven an electric vehicle, you know with the pedal it feels very different to drive. They're the same size. They maybe flow a little different down the road because they're very much heavier. And then all of the equipment on board is different for the drivers. But from a troubleshooting and maintenance perspective, when we get signals from the bus and we have to figure out what that means, they're all under warranty. We do work with Proterra very closely. In fact, we're still learning. We need them to help us work through most of the issues. But it's a learning experience. So we're taking it day by day. All right, so transit service improvement timeline. So I just want to take you on a real quick journey back in time and just bring you back up to today, just to touch on the points that the things that we've done in the last few years to improve the transit system. In August of 2019, we kicked off the Iowa City Area Transit Study. In June 2021, the council approved the plan. We had a little pandemic break in there. I think we were all very busy with other things for a bit. The first two pieces of the plan that we implemented was a fare policy alignment with Coralville. In July of 2021, in August, we launched the new bus routes and staff schedules. In January of 2022, we commenced electric bus operations. So we've been in play with electric transportation for a little over a year now, which has been very exciting. And then yesterday, we had our first round of service level adjustments since the big changes to the transit system. So we'll talk a little bit more about each one of these in the upcoming slides. But the next phases, of course, are to consider zero fare or other enhancements, and to work on the bus stops. That's kind of our two hot items that are really kind of at the top of our list right now. All right, so back into that rewind mode. So that first group of transit system changes, for those that weren't here, or just a refresher for those of you that were, we redesigned the routes, we renamed them, we numbered them, which has been really helpful. I'm starting to refer to them solely by the numbers, and I'm hearing people in the community do that too. So there's a color assigned to it and a number, which I think helps with legibility. All of our buses now run every 30 minutes or better during peak times, and that's a major improvement over our former system. Half of our routes now have 30-minute service midday, which it was only only a handful of routes had 30-minute service. I think maybe 3 or 4 before. So that was one thing we heard from the community. Let's make service frequency in the middle of the day better so we can use it for these other non-work related or off 8 to 5 schedule work trips. We improved our evening and weekend service, and we made them the same routes as the weekday. So we no longer had a separate evening and weekend route, so you didn't have to think about what time it was. It's just much cleaner and simpler for the public to understand. Of course, we launched the battery electric buses last year. We allowed transfers at any stop. That was something that wasn't system-wide before, so that's been really helpful for the community. Again, we aligned our fare policies with Coralville to make it so much easier for people to make cross-metro area commutes. You could use all the passes bought in either community on either system interchangeably. We introduced zero fare for those 65 plus and those with disabilities, and I can't tell you the number of emails of cheers that I got from people who qualified for those free senior, they called them the senior cards. They were very excited about that. It was really nice to be able to offer that service and give another reason to stay in Iowa City for those in their golden years. Those with disabilities also, qualifying disabilities also are able to qualify for free transit. And then, of course, we had that youth 50% discount. So those were the big changes that we did to the transit system in 2021 and 2022. And what we did yesterday, I'm just going to highlight these really quickly, is we made some changes, physical changes to the North Dodge route. So we no longer directly serve Pearson or ACT. We would drive onto both of those campuses. And they no longer need our service, but thankfully there's other people in the areas that were really excited to have our service, so we changed the route up a bit. Where the ACT campus, we used to pull into the ACT campus off of Scott Boulevard. Now we just go down Scott Boulevard and use that fantastic new roundabout at First Ave and Scott, which is a dream to turn around in a bus. It's much easier than pulling in and backing out, I will tell you that. The drivers have been really happy about that. But now we're providing service to First Avenue roundabout, turning around and coming back before we head north. So we're able to provide direct service to Oak Knoll East, which they were thrilled about, and we're thrilled to be able to provide that service. Further north on the route, when you get over the interstate, we used to serve Pearson, which is on the on the west side, of Dodge Street. They have since ceased their operations, or the bulk of their operations there. So we are now serving the opposite side of the Northgate Corporate Park, where there's more employees, there's more potential for ridership. We're very excited, and we've been working with the Highlander. We have a stop at the Highlander, and they've been very accommodating and very excited to have us there. And we also put 2 stops on Highlander Place, which is that little road that gets you to the Highlander. And so we're excited to start to market that the new transportation service that we have available for that side of Northgate very soon to get the word out and let everybody know. I mentioned that we have 20-minute service now on the Court Street and Town Crest routes. So this is an frequency improvement, so we go from 30 minutes to 20 minutes. This is going to resolve some of these persistent on-time performance issues we had on these routes. We just didn't get these routes right. It was just too tight of 30 minutes was just not enough in terms of the full total schedule. It's a 30-minute route. It wasn't enough time, so we changed the route into a 40-minute route, and then we have higher frequency service, so we put more buses out there, and that is solving the problem and providing better service. So it's an absolute win. 40-minute service on these 2 routes in the evening and Saturdays too, which is an improvement from hourly service. So we're really excited, like I said, to watch how these routes perform in terms of ridership. We've started transit earlier on 8 routes. So after we launched the transit system changes, we heard from a lot of people on the east side that just a trip or 2 would make a big difference. So we are adding 1 to 2 trips on each one of these routes in the early morning hours just to help those early birds get where they need to go or help them make those connections. So we're excited to have gotten that off of the ground yesterday. And while we're making when we open the schedule or when we crack open the schedule or make changes to the system in general, we are always looking for ways that we can improve the schedules for our drivers because there's some tough schedules that are out there. So we increased, while we had the schedule open, we increased the number of shifts with 2 consecutive days off. That's something that maybe not everybody thinks about, but it's just not a possibility for us based on the 17 hours a day we need coverage and the 6 days a week. So we've been really excited about that. Our part-time drivers have more schedule predictability. So to your question, Councilor Taylor, they're the ones that have the most haphazard schedules, I would say, or unpredictable schedules. But we found ways to build some more predictability into each one of that to help encourage those folks, to stick around, but to make their schedules more livable, really, for them. We reduced our split shifts to only 2. I think before we made all these transit system changes, we were at 7 or 8, somewhere in the high, not quite 10, but somewhere up there. So we have employees that work 4 hours in the morning, and then they go home. And then they come back and work 4 hours in the evening, which, as you imagine, it can be a really difficult schedule. But we've found a way. We keep reducing the numbers. We found ways to make it work, and now we're down to only 2 of those schedules. And I think those are people that actually like them. So that's kind of a win for us too. But we're always looking for ways to reduce those split shifts. And then, as I mentioned, we increased the trip length on the Court Street and the Town Crest. Those are great benefits for our customers, to be sure. 20-minute buses come by every 20 minutes, but the delight from our staff has been overwhelming. They have been so happy yesterday and today because those buses, the schedules are so tight, it was almost impossible to get off the bus and run to the bathroom and get back in time or grab something or take a break in between those. It was a really tough route for our drivers to drive. So it's become, I think, our least favorite route to our most favorite route in the course of 24 hours. So we've been really excited that's been kind of a thorn in our side for some time. So we're really excited to make those changes. All right, electric buses. So just a really high level. We're just getting all the data together to start understanding the benefits and the drawbacks of electric buses, but really excited to announce we put 60,000 miles on e-buses, on our electric buses last year, in the first year. That's an 88% carbon emission savings per bus. So we saved 32 metric tons of CO2 just from that transition of 4 buses from electric to diesel, both from having the electric is just generally speaking less carbon intensive, but because we have Mid-American Energy Electric, which is 88% renewable, that really increases the amount of carbon savings that we can see. So that was a really exciting number to see. We also ran the calculations to see how much the fueling costs for an average diesel bus last year versus the average electric bus. And we calculated out that the diesel buses are 98 cents per mile to fuel, and the electric bus only cost 23 cents per mile at our electric rates last year. So it's really exciting news, and that is a considerable real savings. 82,000 total is what we calculated in savings from those 4 electric buses in FY22. As I mentioned before, we're still getting to know the buses. We're still learning their language. We're learning how to troubleshoot. Again, we're very reliant on the manufacturer, and we're still awaiting our final charger installation. That project we've been on temporary equipment, which has kept us moving, but we are really excited to get the final chargers installed. We've been hampered with supply chain issues for a very long time, installation issues. There's not a lot of, I'd say, global experience, at least in this area, in the installation of this equipment. So there's been a lot of back and forth between Proterra, Power Electronics, who is the manufacturer for the chargers, and then our local contractors. So it is a project. We'll be happy once we get this piece done, because we'll have that knowledge and we'll have some more experience going into our next expansion. But we're still waiting on that. And then the bus downtime, the last thing I want to mention again is for the warranty repairs. Like I said, so I would say our repairs for the electric buses are taking twice as long. So that is really the downside right now. Part of that is us. We have to figure out the problem. We have to troubleshoot it. We usually have to bring, if it's a warranty repair, we have to bring Proterra in to help us fix the buses are still under warranty. So things are taking longer, I'd say, in general. There hasn't been a repair that we haven't overcome yet. We figured out how to work through all of the challenges. The doors are a bit finicky, and we're still working with Proterra on those pieces. But outside of that, we've been able to come to a resolution with every repair that's been needed. It's just they're taking longer. So when they're down for longer, and we're hoping to see that to become more commensurate with our diesel buses as we gain that knowledge and experience going forward. All right, so we've arrived at our next steps. So really, we're at the point to just talk about what are some of the next options for our transit service. We were in a very unique position with the Iowa City Area Transit Study. I remember our consultants mentioning how exciting it was to not only be working on a study where we're trying to figure out how to optimize everything, but you're looking, for based on what we hear from the community, how do we enhance the system? And it's still exciting for me to think about. And the council had given us some direction a few years back about the transit service enhancements that you thought might be the most beneficial based on what we're hearing from the community. And those were zero fare transit, Sunday service, and then late night, overnight on-demand service. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of those, just highlight some of the benefits and some of the challenges with those based on our research that we've been doing into those particular enhancements. So first off, zero fare. So what is zero fare? You just hop aboard. There's no fee, there's no pass required. The fare is essentially prepaid. In FY22, just as an FYI, the fare only covered 13% of the cost of each ride. So for those that imagine taking away that fare, you need that fare, and it is a considerable part of our revenue. We'll talk about exactly how much in a few slides, but really that fare only covers 13% of our total the cost of each ride, and that is across the United States. I can't think of a transit system that is not supported with other and needs to be supported with other funds and other funding methods. So ours is, again, 13% of the expenses for each ride. And of course, zero fare is indicated as a strategic plan item in the city's strategic plan for FY23 and 24. All right, zero fare benefits. Lots of benefits here. I probably could have put more on the slide, but there's plenty of words here. Really, it's zero fare, first and foremost, will remove a significant barrier for transit use. And whether that barrier is the cost or the fact that you have to get a pass, go somewhere, get a pass, figure out how to work the fare box. Just it's something you have to do to get onto the bus. So. In building a transit system that will accommodate more riders, what you're looking for is ways to remove barriers, and this could be a very big one. It will increase ridership. We'll talk a little bit more later about what we think that might look like, but it will increase ridership. It will improve our on-time performance. Because if you imagine the stack of customers waiting to get on board to use their pass, they kind of go one at a time. Someone might have questions. Someone might be looking and digging for change, in their pocket. It takes time. So, and those little moments really add up over the course of a whole route. So it will improve our on-time performance. It will clearly reduce our fare collection expenses because we will not have staff time devoted to managing the fare collection system. It will address equity goals for the community, making transportation available to anybody, no matter what income level you're at, easily available to anybody, no matter what income level you're at. It will help to reduce some of those conflicts at the fare box that occur when people don't have fare, don't have enough fare, they want to use a transfer, they can't use a transfer, those things that just happen at the fare box. It will just be a hello, a friendly wave, welcome aboard. It will be a different environment at the fare box, really. One of the most important benefits to me is that no additional staff or buses are required. I couldn't say this years ago when we first looked at this. That was not the case. That is the case now. So if there's an upside to the pandemic, maybe that is it. Because our ridership is down, we do not need to add staff and we do not need to add buses at this time. So just wanted to point that out. This would be easy and a relatively quick implementation from our perspective. We could also potentially forego $900,000 in fare box expenses. So our fare boxes are, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you view the timing, at the end of their useful life. They will stop being supported by our fare box manufacturer, and so either way we can talk about retiring them. We can talk about getting a new set, but it will be upwards of $1 million to replace all of our fare boxes. Going forward, this is a potential way to forego those expenses. Clearly, zero fare would address our climate action goals and our livability goals for the community. So that's if we really want to shift 55% of trips from single occupant vehicles to biking, walking, and riding transit, I can't think of a better way and a faster way to achieve those goals than to provide biking and walking doesn't work for everybody, and if a car or a vehicle is the right tool for the job, I can't think of a better way than to make the transit system zero fare so people can just hop on board and replace that single occupant trip that they might have otherwise made. And last but not least, this would benefit every single person on every single ride. It's one of the very few things that we could do that will truly, no matter what time of day, no matter what income level, no matter what your ability, whether you have a disability, whether you don't have a disability, it would benefit every single person who hops on board in this community. So challenges with zero fare. So of course this would come with challenges, and the first and foremost, I'm sure that's on everyone's mind, is that loss of fare revenue. So in FY22, that would have looked like a loss of about $871,000. This fiscal year that we're wrapping up, it's closer to $1 million, to give you kind of a sense for what that would look like, what gap would need to be made up. There will be federal funding impacts. Locally, we'll talk about this in a few slides, but locally our funding, one of our factors that our funding is dependent on is fare revenue. So that'll be something that we need to consider, and again, we'll talk about that. Increased demand could require more service, staff, and/or capital needs. So again, if zero fare does take off and ridership continues to grow and build, there is a likelihood at some point we would need additional staff, we would need additional buses, we would need additional service to help handle the demand, which would be a great position to be in, but it does not come without financial challenges that would need to be overcome. Increased paratransit demand, that's another factor to consider. So when you take away that fare from paratransit as well, we will likely see an increase in demand. So that's something that we have to be considerate of and think about in addition to the fixed route system.
Will you just make it a little, speak to that a little more?
Sure.
Because paratransit, whatever we do within the city, as far as fare, if it's free fare, it's required that paratransit has to also be free. And then also speak to Coralville, who also has a busing system. What would that look like?
That's great questions. So first and foremost, yes. So because we can charge no more than double fixed route fare for paratransit. So you'll see $1 fare for our fixed route system and then a $2 fare for paratransit. However, if you're making the service free for fixed route, then you need to follow suit with your paratransit services. So that would need to be free as well. And if Iowa City decided to pursue zero fare, that would mean Coralville, I don't believe that they've had these discussions in that community. But if Iowa City was fair, there's a chance that Coralville could still require a fare. So there could still be a bus pass that you would need to purchase, or you would need, if you transferred to Coralville or use the Coralville service, you would still need to bring your dollar or bring your bus pass. So there is a chance that if Iowa City considered that this path forward, that Coralville, there's a good chance that Coralville will still be charging a fare.
And Coralville is clearly aware we're having this conversation.
Yes. Coralville is aware, yes. Yep. Coralville was part of the transit study as well, and the vision item for a zero fare system focused only on only on Iowa City. At that point, we were the only community that was really, CANBUS was also on board with the study. Clearly already have a zero fare system, but it was really only from Iowa City's perspective at that point. And as far as I understand, I don't believe that they've had conversations past that point that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
Yes. And then the last but not least, a challenge that we expect will happen with zero fare is we'll increase in free riding or people riding just to ride. So, and we did see an uptick in this during the small period during the pandemic when we were zero fare and we were backboarding at that time for social distancing. And that can become problematic because, people can be taking up space for other passengers who are trying to get to locations, and sometimes there could be concerning behavior. We do have rules in place to prevent people from, doing that now. So you can only ride one route. You can ride the route, and then you can ride back, but then you have to exit the bus. And just like if there's any concerning behavior, we would handle it just like we handle concerning behavior today. It would not be any different, but this is something to be aware of that will likely be an outcome on some level. All right, transitioning from zero fare to Sunday service. So what is Sunday service? Basically mirroring the Saturday schedule on Sunday. It would be fixed route, and it would also be paratransit service. So that would be both of those would be offered on a Sunday if that service were considered. Hourly service, so most of our routes run hourly on Saturday now with 40-minute service on the Lower Muscatine and as of yesterday on Court Street and the Town Crest. Benefits to Sunday service. Well, it would be a predictable 7-day-a-week service, so there would be no question of whether there was service offered on any particular day. It would improve access to weekend employment opportunities, weekend access to shopping, festivals, church, recreation, that sort of thing across the weekend. It was highly requested in the transit study. And it would, as I mentioned before, it would apply to fixed route and paratransit. So both of those services would be available. All right, challenges with Sunday service. I think the first and foremost challenge is that we are going to need additional staff in order to provide 7-day-a-week service. It becomes a considerable challenge to add that extra day on Sunday. We would need more drivers to be sure, 10 additional drivers, but we would need additional administrative staff. We would need a supervisor, a weekend operations supervisor to manage it. We have an on-call situation that we kind of get by with right now, and we don't have mechanics on staff over the weekend, and we don't have maintenance staff on the weekend, but we would need that staff if we had service on both days to ensure that continuity of service throughout the week. 10 3-quarter-time drivers right now, I honestly can't tell you how long that would literally take if we posted that right now to fill those positions. It would take some time. It took us the better part of between August and now, and we're still not fully staffed, to get to fully staffed from the 4 additional drivers that you approved last August. So it would be a real challenge to get the number of drivers, and I honestly wouldn't be able to peg a time to that very easily. Again, I mentioned these issues earlier, that the candidate pools have diminished. We have less applicants with CDLs, and then new federal requirements, which are lengthening the process by which people, the training that people need before they can get their CDL. Because of the additional staffing increases necessary, the expenses were forecasted to increase by about $1.3 million annually. Paratransit demand would also increase, like I mentioned. So paratransit demand is about $68 a trip. We had 25,000, a little over 20, almost 26,000 last fiscal year in terms of trips, to give you a sense for how many of those trips we offer throughout the community. And then the last challenge I want to mention is that we expect Sunday ridership not to exceed 2 to 4% of the weekly ridership. So again, if you visualize that day of the week chart, that Monday through Thursday was pretty consistent, Friday dropped down, and Saturday really dropped down. Sunday would be about half of what that Saturday service would be in terms of expected ridership.
I know this is like an onion where you peel one thing back and there's more and more layers to this, but I was wondering, I know at one point earlier on, there was the idea of a pilot program, right? And I'm just wondering, within scope of that, I guess, was there a study done on what routes would be most used by, where would it be? I'm not coming out with a question, right? I think you know where I'm going. I guess what I'm thinking is in terms of Sunday ridership and sort of the big lift that it would take in terms of capacity, of money, and whatnot. Have you been able to consider maybe, well, it's the south route, it's Court, it's, whatever, but it would be like, we've got 4 routes that we're going to go with to begin with, or to say that this is what we're going to offer, and then others can chime in, other users can say, hey, actually, we would want this. I don't know if, like I said, I understand this is incredibly complex, but I'm thinking, I love that you gave the scope of like, here's what it would be for everything. Have there been other considerations of scaling it downward a little bit?
It's a really good question, and I don't think from a fixed route perspective we considered anything besides an all or nothing. Not to say that it couldn't happen. I mean, theoretically, we could apply a service, but I think that the benefits might diminish though, because we would still need all that staffing, that administrative overhead, to provide even service on Sunday at all. So the cost benefit might not be there unless you can maximize your ridership, which would really take kind of a full expansion. Yeah. We did some other options we did look at is doing an on-demand option on Sunday. One of the, and that's a different animal altogether. But the next option I'm going to talk about is a late night, overnight, on-demand option. But really, that could be extended to any time transit is not in operation. So in theory, if that was that might be an option for Sunday service as well. So there might be a way to utilize that service to help provide on-demand support on Sundays. But yeah, we did look at this holistically. We didn't get, route by route ridership projections from the consultant team. Yeah.
Your point, though, about the overhead, I mean, that's just not going to give you the return on investment if it's just to downsize the number of routes. So yeah. All right. Thank you.
All right, so segue right into late night on demand. And like I said, this could be also applied to anytime transit is not in service. I think that's how some communities use this as well. So again, runs when transit is not in service. This particular way we're envisioning this would be a shared vehicle or van pool. You'd schedule by phone or by app. And this is another strategic plan item that's in the plan for FY25 or FY28 to evaluate. So the benefits of an evening or late night on-demand service is that it provides a safe late night transportation option for employees. It provides equitable access to opportunity. It's a reliable service. There's some other options out there where you don't really. I'm thinking Uber or Lyft or some sort of partnership in that respect, but you don't always know the supply of vehicles at any one hour. This is kind of more of a reliable and a guaranteed ride. And of course, it supports economic development and our equity objectives. Challenges cost significantly more per ride than transit. There's a question, of course, of who would contract and operate the service. A regional service would be best in this community, I suspect, and serve those who work and live in different communities. Not all late night, overnight demand is just enclosed within Iowa City, so it could be a broader discussion than what we're having right here. That might require cost-sharing agreements with other communities. And our preliminary estimate, and it's been a bit since we put this together, was about $650,000 per year, and that was just really considering Iowa City-related trips, and that was about $35 per ride. I suspected if I ran these numbers right now, you'd see that $35 per ride go up maybe by $20, based on how we've seen, for example, seats ridership per ride go up. So costs are escalating and increasing. It seems like by the minute we're all hoping that things start settling down, but I suspect that number, when we revisit it, it's going to look higher.
It's probably a dumb question, but why not the city buy half a dozen vans and hire those six positions or whatever it would be with all the added stuff? What would be as opposed to contracting it out?
I would say, and we did look at that too, and this was prior to your arrival on council. We did look at internally managing that, and between the software package that we would need to get the vehicles and the staffing, I don't think it rose to the top of the list in terms of the cost benefit.
Okay.
It would be, and I would suspect anybody who's doing the service, whether it was in-house or any other service, it's going to be a challenge to staff it as well, especially this because it's late night and it's overnight. So, yeah, I think those are some of the challenges that we would have in-house.
I think it's just looking at who already has maybe invested in some of those fixed assets, whether it's an app if you're subsidizing an Uber or a Lyft type of operation, or you have providers like Horizons that does this up in Lynn County, and being able to tap into not only their workforce that may be able to go between communities, but also their dispatch system, their vehicle fleet. There's economies of scale to tap into. Even seats might be an option to explore. But for us to start on demand from scratch, we just have to expect it'd be a little bit more expensive with that initial investment in the back end of things.
Would that hold true then for a Sunday service because that would be daytime? Would it be the same sort of thing, or would that change the dynamic a little?
You mean in terms of whether it would be
Harder to find staff because it no longer would be overnight, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think anything that we would need to staff on a Sunday during the day would be easier for us to staff on a night. However, weekend staffing is a challenge in general for us. But yeah, for the reason Jeff outlined, the economies of scale and the fact that especially Horizons I think of, but anybody with a van pool service could provide this. It seems like it would be a quicker, more efficient process to rely on a reliable partner who's provided the service with results. And honestly, Horizons comes to mind, and I've spoken with Cedar Rapids. They've gotten very good feedback from Cedar Rapids because they provide off-transit service for Cedar Rapids. So they provide they're the contracted service for Cedar Rapids. So it's good to know there's a model in the area that works, and they have expressed interest in potentially expanding if that's ever something that the council wants to pursue.
I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, so I'll ask one more. The Horizons, do you know, what do they charge? Do they charge the riders a certain set fare, or does it depend on distance, or how does
So
that
when
work?
we last talked, and this might have changed, because again, that $35 per ride estimate was developed in part with conversations through Horizons. They were charging, I believe it was $6 one way. And that, again, was a couple years ago, so I don't know if that's changed, which is not inexpensive, really. It's not, but it's when for the passenger. But when you're talking about, cost per ride of 35 or up, it's a small portion of it. So the City of Cedar Rapids does subsidize the service. I think all the metro area entities, it's my understanding that they help to support that service.
Thank you.
Yep.
I have one question, because you just answered the one about what the cost for the passenger would be, roughly,
Yeah.
understanding it's
Somewhere
probably
in there.
gone up since then. But the other is whether you've had any conversations with the university about partnering since, and I recognize to your point that, this would probably be more regional than just Iowa City, but on the flip side, especially like weekend nights, I'm really struck by the safety aspect of this, and that I know that at one time there kind of were those like weird party bus get home options. And so I was thinking that the university might, I realize times are tough all over, but I just wondered if those conversations had possibly happened, that there could be a partnership, since I would think that students would be a significant portion of potential riders.
Yes, we haven't, I wouldn't say we have had formal conversations, but that would, because this is on the strategic plan as an item for the future, that will be part of our conversations, absolutely. And they are, it's been interesting to watch university because their services are evolving and changing as well. So we do keep in communication and talk about these different types of services that we have. And so it's something that I'm excited. I think they've just recently rolled out some changes to that end, to their late night, overnight, and that's something I have on my list next time. I have my regular quarterly meeting with the university to talk about just how those programs are going. But that will definitely be part of that discussion at any time when the time is right for us to move forward and bring you more information. We'll certainly be looking at what the university is doing and if there's any partnership opportunities there. Yep. All right, next slide, transit funding. So this is where the real exciting stuff happens. So in FY22, I'm just giving you a snapshot on this slide of what our transit funding, our revenue looks like. So you can see the largest portion is, we use that for a local match, but that is, that's really our transit levy. So that's our property tax revenues. That makes up the greatest portion. Our federal operating grant, which we're going to talk about in a few slides, have a little bit of a discussion about that, made up 16% of our total revenue. COVID relief funding, which all of this has an expiration date on it, made up about 23%. So nearly a quarter of our revenue last year was COVID funding relief. Then you get into a smaller slice. So fare revenue made up 8% of our total revenues, to give you kind of a sense for, it's not an insignificant portion, but compared to all of our other funding sources, it is relatively small. And then our other funding sources, other revenue, and most of this is proceeds from the Court Street Transportation Center. And if you weren't aware, that was developed in 2006, I believe, as a partnership project between the Federal Transit Administration and the city. And all proceeds are to go to support the transit system. So we have parking proceeds, we have there's a restaurant, there's a daycare, there's the inner city bus. All of those rents, they go to the transit system. So that is what that the bulk of that 7% in other revenue is. All right, a little bit more about fare revenue. First, let's talk about transit trip costs. So if you look at the box on your right, in FY22, each transit trip cost $7.64. So that's how much it costs the city to provide that trip. A $1 fare, of course, covers then 13% of those transit expenses. And I just wanted to show that a fare is kind of a small portion of that, but also the transit trip, that $7.64 may or may not seem shocking, but just a few years ago it was $3 and some cents. So it's more than doubled very quickly. So it's something that we're keeping an eye on. Each paratransit trip costs $68 per trip. And again, we recover $2 for the fare. So that's $66 that we need to come up with from other funding sources. And so that fare only covers about 3% of the expenses for paratransit. So the fares make up, they're not insignificant, but they do make up a small portion of the overall expenses. And as I mentioned before, $871,000 was our fare revenue in FY22. We're forecasting about $985,000 for this fiscal year that's about to wrap up. So those would be the fares that are foregone if we considered moving to zero fare, and that includes both fixed route and paratransit.
Can you help me understand this a little better?
Sure.
I think it used to be $80 per hour for a bus to run.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to make the shift in my head to the 764.
So, and it's probably 100, is it? Yeah. 100 and what do you think it is now? 105. So it's about 105 now per hour. So that is the total cost of operating that bus. So that is the driver, the fuel, the average, the maintenance cost to provide 1 hour of our service. It costs a little bit over $100 per hour. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, as I promised, we're going to get into federal funding land, and I will try to make it as exciting as I possibly can. It's difficult with this material, but 5307 is that operating funding that we get to keep our transit system afloat. It is very important. It helps fund all transit systems across the United States. We're all very dependent on it. And the urbanized area, so the whole urbanized area through the MPO receives an allocation based on an annual allocation based on urbanized area population density, and then last but not least, small intensive communities. And this is bonus funding. And we are a small intensive community. They call it STIC funding. But there are 6 criteria for the small intensive community funding. And if in this criteria we are outperforming larger metropolitan areas, our metro area gets around a $500,000 bonus for each one of those criteria we are hitting. We hit 4 of the criteria on a regular basis. So we get over $2 million extra dollars per year because we are a high-performing metro area, which is really great news. So we take all that funding, comes through the MPO. The MPO helps distribute those funds locally to Coralville Transit, CAMBUS, and City of Iowa City using a formula that they've had in place for some time. This formula considers total operating costs for each entity, locally determined income, revenue miles, and then last but not least, fare revenue. So therein lies the impact, the potential impact to our federal funding by moving to a zero fare. So without any changes to this MPO-JC formula, if you looked at last year's distributions, for example, Iowa City would lose about $600,000 annually moving to a zero fare if no changes to the formula were done. That would be simply because we'd be reporting zero fare revenue into that formula that determines how the funding is distributed. Iowa City would, of course, propose a formula if zero fare, if we decided to move in the direction of zero fare. Iowa City would propose a formula update to keep funding allocations in the metro area stable. So what Iowa City would propose is that we keep our funding formulas stable for the next 2 years based on where they're at right now. So that chart on your right, as I mentioned, there's 4 criteria that we use. The chart on your right shows you basically how those criteria related to the proportion of funding that was delivered to Iowa City, Coralville, or CAMBUS for the last 10 years. So you see in the last 4 or 5 years, Iowa City's proportion has been about 61.33%. Our proposal would be to carry that current funding level and the same level for CAN Bus and the same level for Coralville Transit, carry it forward for 2 years if we decide to move forward with the zero fare pilot, so that we can ensure that our funding is stable and consistent and we're not penalized for bringing a zero fare service to the community, really the metro area community, Iowa City specifically, but we do support transit service for the metro area also. All right, more about federal funding. So more than you probably ever wanted to know. So this chart shows our federal funding between FY13 and our forecast through FY29. And you can see in the light pink, the allocations when they were much lower in the first 10-ish years, 10 or so years. That was under former federal legislation. It was MAP 21, if you follow that sort of thing. But you could see our funding levels were relatively low. They never cleared $2 million. We received a historic increase in our federal funding for transit as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law that was signed into law last year. Life-saving, life-giving, not just for us, but for transit agencies across the country. It was nearly a 50% increase, which is, we've never seen anything like that. That's, of course, really great news, right? Especially if that federal funding continues. You can see there's a 5-year time limit right now in the bipartisan infrastructure law. We don't know what happens past those 5 years. This graph shows you what would happen if federal funding continued to on the same trajectory. But we also don't know if this scenario is going to happen, where it was a historic increase and then it's followed by a decrease back to our previous funding levels. There isn't a historic record of transit funding making such dramatic drops, but we need to be prepared, especially when we're considering these really these kind of high-ticket transit service enhancements. We need to be prepared and aware of all options. So there is a potential for drop-off. And in the next couple slides, I'm going to show you some transit funding forecasts. We forecasted each one if the funding levels stay where we hope they will stay, or even increase. We would not be opposed to an increase. We did not run a scenario about an increase, but we also want to make sure we're presenting to you tonight to what it would look like if that funding level dropped back down again, because that's something we need to consider. All right, so first slide I want to show you is status quo operations. So this is if we did nothing, no enhancements to the transit system. We just keep on running the transit system. You can see in the top scenario here, this is where there's no drop-off in federal funding. You can see, even with no drop-off in federal funding, even if we don't enhance the transit system in any major way, we're going to start seeing budget shortfalls in the out year in FY29. If there is a drop in federal funding, we're going to start seeing those shortfalls a little bit earlier. We're going to start seeing them in FY28. At $76,000 is what it's forecasted, but really in FY29, if that federal funding drops off, we're expecting at least a $2.8 million shortfall at that point. So that's just something for us all to be very aware of in general. We're not the only transit agency who's seeing this on the horizon. And it's just something we need to be cognizant of as we're having these discussions about transit services.
You can put a pin in this if it's upcoming, but you had a slide as well that said that the main revenue source right now is actually our property taxes. And so I'm wondering about all of the changes in the state and property taxes and what that does. So just.
It's a good question. So I'm trying to think how far down the road Nicole went with when we were developing these scenarios. There could be changes to our property tax level. If they make changes to how we are able to assess, right now it's 95 cents on every $1,000 in taxable valuation. If the state makes changes to that, there's no changes right now in this latest batch, but if there are changes to that in the future, this is going to change.
Yeah, that's right. The legislation that just passed this session did not touch the transit levy. But there's clear intent to continue down the road of property tax reform next session, too. You heard a lot of this is a first step, this is a start type of language from the state legislature. So at this point, we don't anticipate a change to the levy. But at the end of the day, what this is showing and the underlying assumptions that are going into these numbers is expenses are far exceeding revenues. So this shows roughly about a 5% growth year over year in expenditures for status quo operations. And, excuse me, revenues would only be growing about 2%. Now, if you remember, the last 2 years, we've had a decrease in taxable value, the last 2 budget years. So we would like to think, and historically, we've performed better than 2% on the property tax side, but that hasn't been our case recently. So there is some conservative numbers built in here, but we've also have good reason to budget conservatively, or at least project conservatively here.
All right, so the other funding projection we wanted to share tonight is if we went into a zero fare system. So under the top scenario, that's a no drop off in federal funding. That's our best case scenario right now. You can see we would have funding available for 4 years. We're assuming we're going to be able to break even for those 4 years. Those 4 years are the last 4 years we'll have the COVID funding, the COVID relief funding available to us. Those are coinciding. In addition to that increase in federal operating, the COVID funding has been really a lifesaver for the community. So it becomes a challenge when we get into FY27. So then we start to see the shortfalls appear. In 27, we see over a $900,000 shortfall with no decrease in federal funding. So this is the best case scenario. $2.2 million shortfall forecasted in FY28. 2.5 million forecasted in FY29, and again, that's if federal operating funds continue at the same level. Situation gets a little bit more bleak if there's a drop-off in federal funding. Again, in the 900,000s in terms of a shortfall in FY27. FY28, it's looking more like a 3.5 million deficit, and then FY29, upwards of 3.9, 5 is what we're forecasting for a shortfall with a zero fare. So clearly, there's things for us to think about, and what this slide tells me is that we do have funding for a pilot, but we're going to need to think really long and hard about if this is something that we want to continue for the community, if this is a direction we want to head, we're going to have to think long and hard about how we might be able to support it through other funding and revenue sources in the future. Which leads me to my staff recommendation. So. At this point, from staff's perspective, where we're at, especially considering where we're at with the ridership and the costs associated, costs and the other challenges associated with all of these different enhancements, our recommendation is that we would prioritize a 2-year zero fare pilot. And the reasons are, first and foremost, that zero fare will benefit every single rider every single day. No matter what time they're riding, it's going to be a benefit for every single person. We expect ridership to increase between 20 to 60%. In the Iowa City Area Transit Study, the consultants, based on other experiences and with communities not unlike ours across the country, they forecasted 40 to 60%. I bumped that down a little bit to get us a little bit lower because I'm not quite sure about the pandemic effect, but it could be anywhere in there. But I suspect we will see a significant ridership increase, which would be a great thing for the community. Again, it will remove that barrier for transit use for all those people who just haven't hopped on board because they just haven't figured out the fare thing. They just didn't want to go get the fare, take the fare, don't know how to work the fare box. It somehow makes them nervous. How easy to just hop on board and go. This is one of those rare community projects that will truly address climate, equity, economic objectives, livability objectives. It could really put Iowa City on the map. We're already all over the map in terms of livability. We're always very high on the rankings, but in all honesty, the ease with which people move throughout a community is a hallmark of a great community. And Iowa City could also be known for having a great transit system that is free and so easy to use. These are the things that help make Iowa City a great place to live. It would definitely improve the passenger and driver experience. It would make boarding and deboarding quicker, reduce those conflicts at the fare box. We can implement it fairly quickly. Like I said, if a Sunday service would take time to implement, to get the staffing, to get things in order, and the other late night, overnight, that will also be a service that's going to take some time to plan and execute. This one can be done fairly quickly. We have the potential to forego $900,000 in today's cost for replacing the fare boxes. Those, of course, will rise over time. And then again, the less conflicts at the fare box, which I already mentioned. So back to those other options that have been we've been percolating on and thinking about for several years. To address Sunday service first, it would be challenging to staff, as I've mentioned, especially in the staffing conditions we're at right now. It would be difficult to pilot in that you have to hire staff, additional staff, in order to pilot. So, then you could come to a point multiple years later, maybe it's not the direction we want to proceed, and then you have this additional staff on board, and that could be challenging from a pilot perspective. And we generally expect a low overall ridership increase. Again, back to that day of the week slide, we're going to see probably half of Saturday's ridership. Late night on-demand service also has a high cost per ride. We do expect relatively low ridership when compared to the fixed route system, and that will take more time to develop that entire project. So from our perspective, from staff's perspective right now, the timing is really ideal to consider a zero fare pilot at this time. We have the COVID relief funding, which is a great position for us to be in. We're very thankful for that federal support. We are in an unfortunate and fortunate position where we have COVID ridership losses, so we have extra capacity, known capacity that we know we can increase ridership with, and we don't have any additional staffing needs or any additional buses. That was not the case when we did the study. The price tag for this was, I think at that point, $2.3 million in annual operating costs, and then about $4 million for additional buses. So we're in a different situation now. So I don't want to go through another pandemic again to get into this situation, but this might be a really great opportunity to take advantage of some of that ridership losses and help build that back. We would recommend an annual check-in with council. The things that we'd want to discuss would be to review the ridership, what we're seeing from a ridership perspective, review the financial forecast that we just reviewed with you, determine whether to resume collecting fares and initiating fare box procurement. Those processes we will need to plan for well in advance. It's not an easy thing it will take some time, the better part of a year, if we do transition, if we were to move forward with zero fare, and if we ever wanted to transition out of that pilot back into a fare-based system, we would need the time to be able to get the fare boxes that we need. And another thing we would want to discuss at these check-ins is really discuss funding strategies to address potential future shortfalls. And speaking of funding sources, so this is just a really high-level, quick chart just to identify what some of those funding sources could be. They could be increased parking fees. That could help support transit operations. There could be changes to or use of property taxes to help support operating or capital expenses. There could potentially be a utility tax or a sales tax that could help support operations or capital expenses. And the last one I wanted to mention is community partnerships. So this is something that other communities have leveraged in their own communities to help support zero fare. Missoula, Montana is one example. They have very strong community partnership, and I think their entire zero fare launch was, well, not their entire, but it was made possible by partnerships within their communities. So businesses, organizations that found the value in providing an easy zero fare transit system, and they have been running it for some time, successfully running their service for some time. All right, so if zero fare, if we were to continue down the path of zero fare, this is kind of what the launch sequence might look like. The completed phases brings you basically up into this point today where we're discussing, we're having our work session discussion. But the next steps would be in July, if this is the direction we want to move to, we would go back to the MPO and ask for a funding formula discussion to make sure that, especially within this pilot period, that we aren't going to lose federal funding at this time, that it remains stable. So we would like to have that discussion on the MPO board level. We could plan, like I said, we can make this transition relatively quickly. We could transition the summer or fall to a zero fare system. It is one of the rare big changes that we can make in the transit system that we can do quickly, and it's hard to do things quickly in transit. So summer or fall is when we could expect to launch. We would schedule a one-year check-in. Next summer, we would come back and talk through those items that I just discussed, funding, how the ridership's going, just have a general discussion about where things are at, what the funding forecasts look like. And then we would also make plans for the next year and have, again, another check-in in the summer of 2025 and determine how to proceed from that point. So that concludes the presentation. Thank you all for letting me go on about transit. I'm always very excited to do so. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Quick, do you anticipate any difficulties with the MPOJC discussion about the funding formula? Because that seems like if that goes poorly, that could be an obstacle or a thing that would trip us up.
Great question. We've had a preliminary discussion already. So I met with the MPO. The MPO hosted a meeting between us, Coralville Transit, and CAN Bus, and everybody wants more money always, right? But I think everybody, the general tenor of the discussion was that nobody wanted to lose money. So I think there's definitely some opportunity for discussion here, and if we're presenting it in such a way to carry us through this zero fare and maintaining the funding that's already there in terms of proportions, I think we would have we would get a good shot at concurrence with that.
Are there any other parts of the funding proposals, grants, anything else that's based on fare that ridership counts could substitute for? Or could we be facing any other things that might trip us up in that way?
I don't believe trip us up. There are opportunities in my mind, depending on how much we increase ridership and how our performance numbers go up, but there are two more stick categories where we could potentially get bonus funding. So I would like to look a little bit more into if we start increasing our ridership, we're getting this 20, 30, 40%, what would it take for the community, the greater metro area, to bring more money in? And I'm not saying that's a done deal, but that's something that I want to look a little bit more into. Barring, I think that, as Jeff mentioned, the question marks funding levels in my mind are, property taxes. What happens on the state level with property taxes in terms of transit funding? That's not sure how that's going to pan out. But I think federally, I think that is really the local distribution formula is the last piece that we need to really seriously look at.
And it seems like in many ways the long-term success of this program is going to hinge on increases in ridership. And then so how will that be counted in such a way that should there be a skeptic of this, we could say, because we won't have the fare counter, right, which is a pretty hard and fast way. So what would those ridership counts look like if somebody did have questions, like the federal government wanted to audit those counts to make sure they were accurate and complete? How does that work?
That's a great question. We will be required to. So we're going to maintain the fare boxes in the buses for the duration of the pilot. We would not get rid of them, and so we will still count on them. So, for example, on election day, we do zero fare on election day. So we cover them up, and then we have a button that we push to count ridership. We need that ridership data, and we will collect it. Because,
Sure.
It is required. It's a requirement of our federal funding as well that we have that ridership data. If this is something that the community would like to pursue long-term, we will probably move to a system more like CAN Bus's system. They also have to report numbers, and they don't have ridership. And you've all seen CAN Buses. There can be crush loads of people getting on those at one time. We all have tablets on our bus. They're Synchromatics tablets. They're our AVL system. The drivers log in and log out. It allows us to see from a dispatch perspective where the buses are. It sends that information to the app. There is counting software, if you will, add-ons that we can buy so that the drivers could use that to collect data. And then CAN Bus also has automatic passenger counters over their doors. So they use a dual combination. And I'm not sure how they reconcile them, but that's something I'm very interested in finding out about. So we plan on meeting with CAN Bus and figuring out a little bit about their system. But I have heard that the way that they're doing it is really effective, and they really like it. So we will still continue. We will still continue to count. We will still have ridership numbers. We will still have that data that we can make available to anybody in the public.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you.
I think one other point that certainly I've made in public events where we've talked about transit is if we were to do this, then Iowa City becomes a zero fare city. I mean, CAMBUS is already zero fare. I think having both systems zero fare makes a much more coherent statement about Iowa City as a transit city. So I think there's that. I mean, it is interesting. CAMBUS is, coming from the Bay Area, it's really almost equivalent to what I experienced in the Bay Area. And it has very high, it's serving students who are living in a high density, for the most part, parts of Iowa City. So the buses, that's also why it reminds me of San Francisco. The buses are crowded. But yeah, I really do like the idea of Iowa City being known as a transit fare city, whether you're riding Iowa City Transit or CAMBUS. I think that says a lot about transit as a priority here. And then all the other reasons, of course, I think make perfect sense. I know in my experience, bus drivers have a hard job, collecting fares as well as driving the vehicle. So getting that off their plate, I think is a huge benefit to the driver, which, it's a hard enough job without worrying about making sure people are paying their fare and the actual paying of the fare and so forth. So I remember riding in Brazil where they had a separate person on the bus collecting the fares from the driver, which I thought, well, that's nice. But yeah, just taking that off their level, their responsibilities, I think would really enhance the, the experience of the driver. And then the bus stops, you mentioned that. I've also tried to emphasize it's, taking the bus is also either a walk or a bike ride to the bus. So what's that experience like? And certainly the bus stops, I, had many experiences where, you're hypersensitive to time when you're waiting for a bus. So trying to make that as pleasant as an experience as possible, I think is another important piece.
And I'm sure council can ask a lot more questions. One thing I wanted to know is, when do you need an answer from us, time-wise? Because we saw your timeline at the bottom.
Sooner rather than later,
Okay.
if you'd like to meet that timeline. We would, like I said, if we receive the direction to proceed, the first agenda item would be to have go back and have those follow-up conversations with Corville Transit, with CAMBUS, come to some agreement about the funding formula, and then take that to the MPO board for formal review, and that would be in July, I think the 12th or the 13th. Kent is here, he's not here. So
we have at least one more work session that we can maybe follow up on this, or we can come back to this item.
Yeah, you could schedule another work session, or we could put a resolution on the formal meeting if you'd like to, have a formal vote on this and kind of that historic record of this pilot. That's fine too. We could take that approach. I don't know that a resolution is required, but there's a good. We'd like to get this launched. Our target would be before the school year. I think that's a good target to have. But there's a lot of work to do in terms of communication and marketing prep as well, and we'll need every bit of it. So we'll probably start working towards that after today without making any concrete decisions until you feel comfortable giving us that green light.
And maybe I can get a temperature of the council.
Sorry. I think as far as the pilot, I don't have really any hesitancy. It is something that we would be setting the expectation that could be reversed if it didn't go as we would hope. And I just think it's hard to imagine a project with as much strategic plan alignment as something like this. So based on, an hour and 40 minutes of information from Darian, I feel comfortable saying, yes, let's pursue this now.
I also strongly support the pilot.
All right.
I do too.
Great. So I think we'll go ahead with a resolution, and we'll probably have it on our next agenda or one of our future agendas. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Great.
Thank you.
Very exciting.
It is exciting.
All right. We're going to move on to our, we're going to try to do this right now.
All right.
4 minutes.
Yes, we're going to move on to information packets, May 4th. Oh, I'm sorry, yes. Maybe clarification of agenda items first. All right, May 4th, information packet.
The press
IP
release relating to the
Yeah.
beautiful art.
IP3. Yeah, it's going to be our 2023 Iowa Small Business Community of the Year award that we received. And we actually, on Saturday, received that by the SBA members. And so we're going to ask council at the end of this work session to gather around and take a picture. Yes, this is a huge accomplishment for this community. So, yeah.
Nice.
May 11th. I'll point out that IP7 May 20th will be at the Iowa City Farmers Market. Mayor Alter and I.
You just
Mayor Pro
promoted
Tem.
me.
All right, Mayor Pro Tem Alter and I. And that time will be 9 a.m. to 11 a.m.
I noticed the memo from our climate action coordinator, and I don't know that needs, I think that's for our information. We're planning to pursue those. Is that right, Jeff?
Yeah, it was something, last time Sarah presented to you, you had asked her to go back to the Climate Action Commission and have this discussion. So she's just reporting back. We don't need specific direction.
Looks good. It's exciting.
Yep, and I do plan with Mayor Pro Tem and Jeff to have kind of some of those ARPA fund dollars, some of those, I would say, low-hanging fruit, or some of the ones that people are waiting for answers to kind of get it on our agenda sooner rather than later. So
Yeah.
we'll be working on that.
We're pretty close to having the quarterly update. Is that in June?
Yeah, the quarterly update will be coming up here in May. Or yeah, June.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yep. And I just know there's a few things on there that I think the council can talk about. So we'll work some of that in.
Great.
All right. And anything else for May 11th? We're going to move over to USG. Yes. Welcome, welcome.
Hi, Council. Sorry I was a little late. I was dropping off my roommate at the airport. Yeah,
That
almost
time of
every
year.
Oh, yeah. Every other student is basically gone from campus, except for the ones living here in town. So great parking, but the route to Cedar Rapids is really busy. So overall, not much news coming from USG. Keaton and I, current GR director and former city liaison, are working on a runner's guide to present to you guys, obviously, and to have data ready. And then we're working on a WESCAP housing program that we've ran multiple years. It goes to the Iowa House Hotel. So that's in the works from us mostly. And then UIWA wants to increase non-student undergraduate tuition by 1% and a $305 increase from in-state residents. I got this from the Daily Iowan, so that's university news, but not much else is really happening besides a bunch of construction. So thank you guys so much.
All right. Well,
Thank you.
good rest to all the students that are taking off this summer.
Yes.
All right. Any updates on boards, any commissions, assignments, or anything like that?
Just quickly, Rachel and I participated in the Disability Committee, a Zoom meeting, and there was a really excellent presentation, I thought, by the Joint Emergency Management Commission on storm preparedness, including information about mechanisms they have in place for persons with disabilities, which I hadn't really ever thought of that. You hear the storm sirens, but what if you're deaf or those kinds of things? So it was really an excellent presentation, and with all of our recent severe storm warnings we've had, I think it would be a good presentation to have either for one of our work sessions or even to suggest for a joint entities meeting. I think it would be good for people to know those kinds of things. We talked about some upcoming dates for the disability awareness events. I don't have those dates in front of me. Rachel, do you recall some of those dates? I think they're coming up more in the fall, I believe. And but keep your eyes out for that, because that's always a good event, and usually on the Pet Mall and proclamations and things. So that's all.
Great. And that might be, at least from what I can hear, a good presentation for the joint entities
Yes,
meeting.
it would be very good for that.
Yeah. Any other updates? All right. Well, we are adjourned until our formal meeting at 6 p.m.
Nice. Are efficient.
Well.
Recording in progress.
right, we are going to start the City of Iowa City's formal meeting for May 16th, 2023. It is 6 p.m. I'm going to call this meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Alter,
Here.
Burgess,
Here.
Dunn,
Here.
Armson,
Here.
Taylor,
Here.
Teague,
Here.
Thomas.
Here.
All right. Well, welcome to all the counselors once again, and to everyone that is here present and those that are virtually tuning in right now. The second item are proclamations, and 2A is National Gun Violence Awareness Day, and this will be read by Counselor Burgess, who is in orange today.
Whereas every day, more than 120 Americans are killed by gun violence and more than 200 are shot and wounded, with an average of more than 17,000 gun homicides every year, making Americans 26 times more likely to die by gun homicide than people in other high-income countries. And whereas Iowa has 323 gun deaths every year, with a rate of 10 deaths per 100,000 people, a crisis that costs our state $4.2 billion each year, of which $53 million is paid by taxpayers. Iowa has the 41st highest rate of gun deaths in the U.S. And whereas support for the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens goes hand in hand with keeping guns away from people with dangerous histories, and whereas mayors and law enforcement officers, in partnership with local violence intervention activists and resources, know their communities best, are most familiar with local criminal activity and how to address it, and are best positioned to understand how to keep their citizens safe. And whereas gun violence prevention is more important than ever as we see an increase in firearm homicides and non-fatal shootings across the country, increased calls to domestic violence hotlines, and an increase in city gun violence. And whereas in January 2013, Hadia Pendleton was tragically shot and killed at age 15, and on June 2nd, 2023, to recognize her 26th birthday, people across the United States will recognize National Gun Violence Awareness Day and wear orange in tribute to her and other victims of gun violence, an idea inspired by a group of her friends who asked classmates to commemorate her life by wearing orange, choosing this color because hunters in the field or the woods wear orange to announce themselves to other hunters, and orange is a color that symbolizes the value of human life. And whereas by wearing orange on June 2nd, 2023, Americans will raise awareness about senseless gun violence, honor the lives of gun violence victims and survivors, and commit to work with evidence-based solutions to reduce gun violence, pledging to do all we can to keep our families and communities safe. Now, therefore, on behalf of Bruce Teague, Mayor of Iowa City, I do hereby proclaim the first Friday in June, June 2nd, 2023, to be National Gun Violence Awareness Day, and I encourage all citizens to support their local community's efforts to prevent the tragic effects of gun violence and honor the value of human lives. Accepting this proclamation will be Monica Maloney-Mitros and other Moms Demand Action. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary Teague, for making the proclamation, and Councilor Burgess for reading that. And I am addressing the city council members, all those here present this evening, Mayor Teague, and all of those who may be on Zoom or will see this meeting in the future. I am here representing Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, and I'd like to take a short time. We've already heard the statistics, the heartbreaking statistics. I'm not going to repeat that, but I want to ask you to honor Hadia, hearing her story tonight. And what I want you to know is that we can take action to reduce gun violence, beginning right here in our community. On Wear Orange Day, step out wearing orange. Take a friend with you. That will grow the movement. Wear orange to show that you value each person's life. Wear orange to show you want to honor those killed, those wounded, and everyone impacted by gun violence. Wear orange to call for an end to gun violence, advocating for a future free from gun violence. And then, after wearing orange, or as you wear orange, continue that weekend and into the week and take action. Positive action. Join with community partners such as DVIP and NAMI as they advocate for support to those who are experiencing gun or domestic violence or who need additional funds and care for health mental issues. Participate in the Be Smart program, a program to educate gun owners to lock their guns, to keep their ammunition separate from guns, so that our children and young people who may be discouraged in the moment cannot instantly get a gun and cause gun violence and such agony for all involved. Write, call, text, repeat, write, call, text your legislatures to tell them to support common sense gun laws and to ask them to vote no on those that are not, that will not promote safety. Support your neighborhood events, strengthening our community. Use your social media to text and promote gun safety measures. Check in on our Moms Demand Action Iowa Johnson County Facebook page to learn more about how to reduce gun violence and get involved. Thank you all for listening. I hope to see you out wearing your orange, promoting gun safety in our community, and taking action to move forward so that we truly do come to a time when we are free from gun violence in America. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 2B is National Public Works Week. Whereas Public Works professionals of Iowa City Public Works Department focus on infrastructure, facilities, and services that are of vital importance to a sustainable and resilient community, and to the public health, high quality of life, and well-being of the city of Iowa City. And whereas these infrastructure facilities and services cannot be provided without the dedicated efforts of our public works professionals who are responsible for maintaining, improving, and protecting our transportation, water supply, water treatment, and solid waste systems, public buildings, and other structures and facilities essential for our community members. And whereas it is in the public interest for the community members and civic leaders to gain knowledge of and maintain a progressive interest and understanding of the importance of public works and public works programs in Iowa City. And whereas the year 2023 marks the 63rd Annual National Public Works Week, sponsored by the American Public Works Association. And whereas the 2023 National Public Works Week theme, Connecting the World Through Public Works, highlights the way public work professionals connect us physically, through infrastructure, and inspirationally, through service to our community, whether as first responders or daily workers, carrying out their duties with pride. Now, therefore, I, Bruce Teague, Mayor of Iowa City, do hereby proclaim the week of May 21st through May 27th, 2023, to be National Public Works Week in Iowa City, and urge all community members and civic organizations to acquaint themselves with the issues involved in providing our public works and to recognize the substantial contributions which public work professionals make every day to our health, safety, comfort, and quality of life. And receiving this proclamation is Ron Kanoki, our Public Works Director, accepting. Oh, there he is.
Mayor Teagan, Council, good evening. On behalf of the 160 Public Works professionals in the Iowa City Public Works Department, I'd like to thank you for this National Public Works Week proclamation and your support of the Public Works Department. The dedicated professionals who work in our engineering, equipment, resource management, streets, wastewater, and water divisions exemplify this year's theme, Connecting the World Through Public Works. Whether providing the everyday services made more challenging by material shortages, responding to extreme weather events, or water main breaks, the Public Works Department is ready and here to serve our community. This year, we will celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Iowa City Water Treatment Plant and will showcase this facility with an open house this Saturday, May 20th. We invite all community members to stop by between 1 and 3 p.m. for a tour of the water plant at 80 Stephen Atkins Drive. The city will have vehicles from its fleet on display with a Touch a Truck event, the Iowa City Public Library bookmobile, and games from the Parks and Recreation to help celebrate. The Public Works Open House event will be the kickoff to National Public Works Week in Iowa City. We look forward to hosting you at the water plant and helping us celebrate the 20th anniversary. Thank you.
Great. All right, we're going to move on to our consent agenda items, 3 through 8. Could I get a motion to approve, please?
So moved, Taylor.
Second, Burgess.
All right, anyone from the public like to discuss any item that is on our consent agenda? If you're online, please raise your hand. In person, come forth. Seeing no one, council discussion. Roll call, please.
Harmson,
Yes.
Taylor,
Yes.
Teague,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Alter,
Yes.
Burgess,
Yes.
Dunn.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. We're on to item number 9, which is community comments. This is an opportunity for anyone to come forth on any, to talk about anything that is not a topic listed on our agenda. If you're online, please raise your hand. If in person, please come forth. Also, 3 minutes will be allotted for each individual. Our clock is not working, but we will have our Mayor Pro Tem keeping the time, and once you hear that go off, your time will be up, and I will say thank you, thank you. All right, please come forth. We ask that you state your name and the city you're from.
Hi,
Welcome.
my name is Sherman White, and I'm here from the last meeting that I was here. I think everybody has a copy of this. I was here on May 2nd. I was before this honorable committee to report and examine several improprieties at the shelter house. On January 10th, 2023, this council awarded Shelter House $1.1 million and Chrissy Candinelli, executive director, $100,000 bonus. What were the merits of such a bonus? But Nicole Chaplin still contends there's no funds available for Sherman. Both facilities, 501 and Shelter House, put out more police calls than Town and Campus and Broadway from anything from racist attacks, drugs, guns, knives, children being housed with abusive parents and pedophiles, male and female prostitution. Mayor Tigg and the chief of police can verify this. I was down there this morning, and there was like 5 police calls this morning when I was down there from 10 to 12 o'clock this morning. I was down there. And I had a friend that OD'd down there recently at 501 building. And even tonight, if I was to go down there tonight, Mayor, I could smuggle anything into either one of those buildings, gun, knife, drugs, whatever. There's no checkpoint. There's no check and balance there at all. No one scrutinizes anything. I mean, and what is the Shelter's House budget? I mean, because everything is donated. Clothes is donated, shoes is donated, transportation is donated, food, cough drops, personal hygiene items, socks, Tylenol, even aspirins are donated. And since I was here the last time, I have attempted to make contact with the staff at Shelter. Even today, I invited Mrs. Candanelli to come down here with me. And I can't get a hold of anybody. They keep their voicemails full, so I can't get through. My caseworker, John Posey, rode by me twice and would not even stop. And he's out there where I was living at town and campus, and he would not stop and acknowledge me or speak to me about anything that I have been calling him about. And I document all my calls, all my emails, and everything that I send to these people.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. We're going to go online to Tristan. Welcome.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, welcome. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to continue to follow up on the discussions on council on the budget for this fiscal year, this upcoming fiscal year, and comments that have been made by the public about the police budget. And I just wanted to again remind council that they have stated in the past that they needed more information from stakeholders and would potentially make a decision to, in the future going forward, allocate less funding to police. So I, again, just wanted to follow up and keep you aware that you had made that commitment and ask what you've done since the vote to approve the budget with the increase in police funding. Who have you reached out to in the community? What have you done to educate yourselves on what information you feel will be enough to make a decision on that? So I just would love to hear from City Council. I think as public servants, that would be nice to know that you have actually taken the many public comments and emails and letters into consideration, and whether you are any more educated or any closer to making a decision on that. So I'll yield the rest of my time, but that's what I had to say today.
Thank you. Anyone else? Welcome. Please state your name and city you're from, and there is also a sign-in sheet there as well.
All right. I also sent some slides. I don't know if you guys have them. There it is.
Sorry.
All right. Hello, my name is David Ramotowski, and I live in the east side of Iowa City, 52245, and I'm originally from Alexandria, Virginia. And so this is a picture of my Honda Super Cub. It's my primary form of transportation, and I've been riding for the last 4 years to get to and from work. I'm currently a PhD student here, and I was a master's student at North Carolina State University in Raleigh, and so that's when I started riding. And so I like to say that I don't work to ride, I ride to work. And so this is usually where I like to park my bike, right next to the Siemens Center, because I work in civil and environmental engineering. And so I think it's very nice that we have parking right next to the building. You know, you can't beat that. But lately, there's been a bit of a problem because that parking is very popular. And so on days when the motorcycle parking is full and when the weather's bad, I like to park in the Court Street ramp. And so I noticed recently that you guys installed a new parking system. And so the gates that close over the lane are now, they extend the whole width of the lane, because before I used to be able to drive around the gates. And so particularly from this side, which I think is the Capitol Street side, there's basically only one way out now, which is to go in the entrance lane, which I think is very unsafe. And then if you go to the other side of the ramp, you can go out the way that you would ride in, but I think this is also pretty unsafe because you basically have to ride across the sidewalk, and it's hard to see over all of the parked cars and everything when you're trying to make that turn. And so I tried to email the parking department about this, but I don't think they really understood. And so I just wanted to make you guys aware. And so I think this is important because the cost of the parking permit is $90, but then if I was to drive my car instead, I would end up paying 1,100% more if I stayed for 4 hours a day, or 2,700% more if I stayed for 8 hours, which I don't think is a very sound investment for a graduate student. And so to conclude, I did a bit of math, and so I found that if I ride my Super Cub for 365 days, one round trip a day, I would generate around 52 pounds of CO2. But if I were to drive my car...
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address this topic or to state anything that is not on our agenda? Seeing no one online or in person, could I get a motion to accept 2 correspondence? Well, actually 1, because that was a presentation. Well, we'll take that one as well. 2 correspondence.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by
Alter.
seconded by
Your choice.
Done. All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0. We're at item number 10, Planning and Zoning Matters 10A as a rezoning, 2640 North Scott Boulevard. Ordinance rezoning approximately 10.26 acres from low-density multifamily residential with planned development overlay to OPD RM 12 for the purpose of amending the approved planned development overlay plan and sensitive areas development plan. This is second consideration, and staff is requesting expedited action.
I move that the rule requiring that ordinances must be considered and voted on for passage at 2 council meetings prior to the meeting at which it is to be finally passed be suspended, that the second consideration and vote be waived, and that the ordinance be voted on for final passage at this time.
Second, Thomas.
Moved by Taylor, seconded by Thomas. Anyone from the public like to address this topic? Seeing no one in person or online. Council discussion. Roll call, please.
Taylor.
Yes.
Teague.
Yes.
Thomas.
Yes.
Alter.
Yes.
Dunn.
Yes.
Harmson.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Could I get a motion?
If I could, Mayor, 6-0 because Councilor Burgess is recusing.
Oh, yes. 6-0 with 1 recusal of Councilor Burgess. Can I get a motion to pass and adopt?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Don, seconded by Alter. Roll call, please.
Taylor.
Yes.
Teague.
Yes.
Thomas.
Yes.
Alter.
Yes.
Dunn.
Yes.
Harmson.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0. We're on to item 10B, which is rezoning JJR Davis Second Edition and JJR Davis Fourth Edition subdivisions located between Mormon Track Boulevard and Dane Road Southeast. And this is a motion for passing and adopting. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved, Harmson.
Second. Alter.
Anyone from the public like to address this topic? All right, seeing 4 individuals, no one online. We'll ask that you come sign in and state your name and city you're from. There are stickers in the back if you wanted to. Oh, you have your stickers. Well, welcome. State your name and city you're from. You'll also have up to 3 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Tig and members of the council. My name is Dennis Mitchell. I'm here once again on behalf of the George Dane Family Trust. Before I get started, once again, I do want to thank all of you for all the time that you've spent reviewing the materials, visiting the property, and spending time with the Dane family members to try to get a better feel for this. There are just a few things I'd like to reiterate as to why we believe that the council should deny the pending rezoning request. First, we believe the current commercial office zoning is much more consistent with the comprehensive plan, including the South Central District Plan and the future land use plan, than the proposed rezoning. These plans all emphasize the importance of buffers to mitigate uses of different intensities, as well as the importance of parks and public spaces. The current commercial office zoning provides an important buffer in transition from the future park as well as the neighborhood. Second, as noted during prior meetings, there is already land zoned CI1 to the south and west of the subject property. This makes it even more important to maintain the current commercial office zoning and the buffer it provides. If rezoned, the only access to the future park could be through areas that have very intensive commercial uses. Moreover, with land already zoned in this neighborhood, CI1, it seems premature at best to rezone these parcels before those parcels have developed. Finally, no plan was included by the applicants with the rezoning request, and they chose not to hold any good neighbor meetings. If rezoned, the future use is almost certainly going to be much more intensive than permitted by the current commercial office zone. If the subject area is rezoned, without a plan, it's going to be difficult to limit the impact to the future park area and the neighborhood. For this reason, we believe the application should be denied or at a minimum deferred until a plan has been submitted. Again, the Dane Family Trust is not opposed to the development of these parcels. We just firmly believe that the current commercial office zoning provides ample opportunity for development, is much more consistent with the comprehensive plan, and is in the best interests of the city of Iowa City. As Councilor Taylor has noted, there is no other park in Iowa City that has intensive commercial zoning as a neighbor. So again, we would urge you to vote against the rezoning request. I appreciate your time and consideration.
Thank you. Welcome. Please state your name and city you're from.
Thank you. My name is Alp Zora. I'm an attorney with the Leff Law Firm of Iowa City, and I live in Johnson County, Coralville to be exact. I'm here today on behalf of the George R. Dane Family Trust. There have been multiple meetings with lengthy public comment and many pages of materials already submitted. Based on all of this, there are sufficient and legitimate grounds for you to deny the rezoning request. To summarize, and just to summarize, I swear, first, the proposed rezoning is incompatible with the existing neighborhood character. The adjacent land will become a future park. Of this, there's no doubt. Intensive commercial use will impair the park with increased light and noise pollution, among other negative impacts. Multiple council members have already spoken about the need for buffers or conditions being placed on the subject property. This is so because the rezoning's negative impacts on the park and incompatibility with the neighborhood are readily apparent to everyone. Second, the proposed rezoning is not consistent with the comp plan, the district plan, and the parks master plan. All of these documents emphasize the importance of buffer zones and open green spaces between parks and, between different types of intensive use. The proposed rezoning has no buffer zones and so is not consistent with these plans. Simply put, you have enough grounds here today to deny the rezoning. Additionally, this matter reminds me of the Hickory Hill Estates project. There the community came together to protect Hickory Hill Park a couple of years ago. You rejected the initial rezoning application because of a lack of adequate buffer zones between the park and the proposed development area. And that led to the developer designing a better plan that had better buffer zones. Here, you're faced with a similar situation. The community has come together and voiced its desire to protect the future park. You've received numerous written communications to that effect, and as well as verbal comments. Here, there's a lack of adequate buffer zones, as the CI1 land is immediately and directly adjacent to the future park. As you did then, you should now deny the rezoning request. This will not stop economic development. Instead, the developer will have a chance to rethink buffer zones and compatibility with the park. The end result, just like with Hickory Hill Estates, will be better, more responsible development. Lastly, and Mr. Mitchell mentioned this, there's no proposed project with this rezoning application. That puts you in a position of incredible lack of information. At the very least, you should defer action. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening, Bob Dane from Iowa City. A couple things in light of what they have said and what was brought up to us at the last meeting. It was suggested that the family should become proactive and maybe establish our own buffer zone in the park property. Two things with that. It wouldn't be ready soon enough to provide the buffer that you suggested we build. And second of all, the estate plan will not allow us to build a buffer on the park property in any direction on any side that would block the view that currently exists. Some people involved with this are proactive. The family, we have been proactive all the way through Mormon Trek's redevelopment and all the zoning requests that have come forward to the council. The initial Mormon Trek was going to come along the ridge line. We had the city engineers come out and said, hey, you're going to have a 40-foot cut to match the old grade to Dane Road. They moved it south to its current location, which is a perfect place for it. It's an old right-of-way that was owned by the county. And we have spoke to the council about all the CI1s in the neighborhood around that. In regard to the buffer zone and blocking the views, I spent the last 2 to 3 years working on the south fence line to clear the volunteer trees that blocked our view to the fairgrounds to the southeast. Billions has also been proactive. They now own all the property from Grace Road, from Grace Drive, all the way around to the White House on Mormon Trek. At the end of the first reading that was approved, they began activity south on the fence line from the farm along Mormon Trek, taking out trees and fences. After the second reading, they moved to the parcel in question right now and removed fences and trees on the west side of Dane Road. But nothing has been planned. Nothing has been planned. So I guess my final question is, does the city really want to have a park, have control of the 17 acres to become a park? If not, let the executor know now, and they can begin making other plans to make it available to somebody else. But it was my father's intention for it to be a gift to the city for the use of the 17 acres. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. Please state your name and city you're from.
Good evening. I am Jane Driscoll, the eldest granddaughter of George and Marjorie Dane. And I ran across this, and you might recognize it. It's the cover of your comprehensive plan update. And I'll point out a couple things. These types of diagrams, emphasis is placed on the text that's the biggest, which is got the most votes or the most mentions, and generally the constituents are participating in that. And I'll just highlight that there are some significant words on here: walkable, community, people, parks, neighborhoods, bike, and teeny tiny down here is shopping and some other like scale and some other words that are small enough that I can't read them that suggest that maybe those aren't quite as important as what the big letters are that you could probably see from where you're sitting. About 10 days ago, as my uncle mentioned, we heard a noise outside and went out and saw some workers tearing down trees, tearing up fences along the south or the edge of Mormon Trek on the right-of-way. That was put in by the city when the street was put in. And then they moved over to the neighbor property along Dane Road and proceeded to take out not only the trees that were inland from there, but the trees and the fence along parallel to Dane Road. Now, why would a owner spend money doing that if they didn't have some sort of plan in mind? The suggestion that the applicant has made that that there is no plan. I can hardly even speak to it because it's so frustrating that there's no plan, that that uncertainty is there. It seems to me a valid reason why you could deny this or defer it. All along in this process, we've heard the supposed park, the speculation about park, the maybe park. Well, now that I think everyone is agreed that this is a legal fact that it's going to be a park, all along it was dismissed, oh, that's not important because we have a property owner that wants to do something, but there's no plan. And now that you know that the park is legal, it is going to happen, it's a fact, that should create some merit and credibility in your minds.
Thank you.
And we have nothing
Thank
on
you.
the other side.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else like to speak? Seeing no one in person or online, council discussion.
Yeah, I'd like to start out on this one. I have struggled with this proposal from the very beginning. I have, to this point, voted twice to approve the rezoning, albeit I have had some reservations with that. I think council and the rest of the public should remember that we made a direction of city staff to include the park in our comp plan update as well as district plan update that is forthcoming. I think, though, both in light of my own personal diving into this topic, hearing from the community and the family about development that is going on, or preparing of land for development that is going on the southern side of the property, I think that does call into question an important value of ours, which is working with our community stakeholders, whether that be our developers, our landholders. We want to work with them in good faith, and we want to expect the same thing from them. So I am a bit concerned at this point. I have seen pictures of the tearing down of the trees, of the beginning to work with the land, and I'm again still concerned that the same property owner that I believe this is the case, the same property owner that is working on that land, not subject to this zoning, owns property within the rezoning area. So, again, I'm concerned that something bigger may be going on here. And this body has, in the past, made it clear that we have an interest in adding conditions to the zoning proposal. That is our prerogative, and it is our problem that we have gotten into a procedural situation where that is not currently possible. I don't think that we should ignore the public interest at play here with regard to a future public park, with regard to our ability to listen to the folks that own the adjacent property, to impose those conditions, something that I will remind the body that they have asked for since the very beginning of this conversation of us. And again, we have gotten ourselves, and I think, again, we're working in good faith with each other. I don't think that was purposeful or deliberate. I think that it was a genuine mistake. I was surprised by the fact that we weren't able to do anything at that point. So I want to share a little bit of my personal philosophy with what I'm going to propose here, and I think that credit is due to Councillor Thomas on this, because this is something that is developed out of our personal conversations, and I really do believe in it. I think that in all of our zoning decisions, we have the ability to create winners and losers. At the same time, we have the ability to try to make the best possible situation for everyone in our community in all those zoning decisions, and that's kind of what I try to go towards when I'm thinking about my decision-making process. So I think it's our prerogative to, at least me personally, make sure that we don't have winners and losers here. Make sure that everyone can, if we're going to pass this, which it may seem as though we may, that we can do some of the conditions that were requested, or have at least have that conversation. We've not even had the conversation about what conditions were requested by the adjacent property owners. I want to have that conversation. And I want to actually be able to do something about it and understand the ramifications of those decisions. So at this point, I do believe that we made an oversight procedurally in moving forward without conditions. And I would like to ask if the property representative is present to answer some questions. Is the property representative present?
John Marner with MMS Consultants, representing the developer as best as possible to try to address
So there
your
is a
questions.
developer? So there is a developer?
The owner.
The owner.
Applicant.
Okay, the applicant, okay.
Correct.
So are you aware of what's going on with the adjacent properties to the south?
With respect to the fence clearing or the fences and the tree clearing?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I feel like I need to intervene on a couple of scores. One, I don't think it's legally appropriate to talk about what's going on property that is not subject to this rezoning unless it bears direct result or impact on this property. And so I don't think we should ask this gentleman about that. Furthermore, there's been discussion both from members of the public and from council about the absence of a plan and so forth. I just want to be clear that that is fine. They can apply for rezoning without a plan. We cannot require them to come forth with a project and so forth, and it would be an inappropriate reason to deny the rezoning just because a project plan has not been put forth.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
So I think then we're good with you, but thank you very much for answering.
Thank you.
I guess my concern then comes less from, of course, we can't require them to present a plan, but the fact that we have been told in the past that no such plan exists and that we can observe that development is going on in the area. And I know that that is not in and of itself a reason to deny, and I would not vote to do so. But it does raise some questions that I have. So my proposal to the body is to allow us to kind of figure out the situation with regard to conditions, to understand, to better understand what the conditions requested by the adjacent property owners would be, to give those considerations proper consideration, and to look into opening the legal process that would be required to impose those conditions. And to that end, I would request a deferment of this until that can be completed. I don't see, again, this as a reason to deny the rezoning, and at this point I'm not saying that I would vote to deny the rezoning, but I do think that we have an obligation, at least me personally, I feel as though we have an obligation to try to make the best situation for everyone. That means for the adjacent property owners, that means being able to address the situation holistically, and I think that we have inadvertently procedurally tied our hands in that way. So my advocacy is going to be for a deferral.
I want to ask, the council did have this discussion on, we lost the ability to do some conditions. And then we asked for our staff, Danielle, to come forth and tell us, like, in light of the procedural, pickle that we found ourselves in, how does some of our desired needs that, the community has mentioned, can play out? And to my knowledge, the staff took clear heed on what this council direction was, as well as the code itself, the things that they would have to do is already there. And so I hear the request for the deferment, but I do feel like we've already fleshed out that. And at that moment, I believe the majority of this council felt comfortable with that. And so for me, I do hear the need, and I agree that it's something that we want to make sure moving forward that there's not institutional memory loss, but there's also things within the code that will just meet some of those standards. So for me, I'm going to be supporting this rezoning, while keeping in mind that the things of the community that you just mentioned, that they want, it may not be all the way there, right? But the elements of making sure to the best of the ability to be a good neighbor is there, and so I'll be supporting this.
May I ask a couple of questions? And one I think is for Eric, and the other maybe for Danielle. So my understanding is that if this goes forward and it's rezoned, or if it doesn't and it's commercial, whatever, at the time, no, let's go with if it is, to the proposed thing, that at the time that a developer may come forward, that's the time that there are conditions that come in for particular kinds of use, right? Like the intensive automotive. That would be when we can talk about conditions, and or that there are conditions already built into the code for certain types of use. So you see, I'm like, one's to you and one's to Danielle.
Yeah, no, I do. And I think it's mostly as to the latter. That is,
Okay.
we're talking about a major site plan review.
Right.
And as I mentioned previously, it would be hard to imagine a development here that would not qualify as a major site plan as opposed to a minor site plan development. And therein, in city code already, there is any number of requirements that are built in there, and we staff have already received guidance from you that, if there's any kind of discretion, for at least for developments that are on Dane, bordering on Dane Road, my memory, that was one of the conditions that you folks were interested in, that, we be exceedingly careful and respectful of the future use of the Dane Family Trust property as a park.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, just refresh my memory, because it seemed to me that, like, with that, like, intensive automotive, that there were already things built into.
So, Eric, do you want to talk about what's appropriate with rezoning for conditions as far as the timing of conditions? There are no conditions on a site plan. It's an administrative review done by staff to code with very specific criteria in the code. But knowing the direction we got on the last meeting regarding this topic, that's also a part of this now. I don't know if your question about when to place a condition is still a question.
No.
Well, the other part of it, I'm sorry, and I should have mentioned this earlier, was that if the neighborhood and development services director under code is empowered to send any major site plan to planning and zoning, again, not council, planning and zoning, for their review. And again, for any development that's going to be bordering on Dane, the understanding from staff was that either Tracy Haichu or her successor, whoever is in that position at that time, would send it to planning and zoning to make sure there was good public input and transparency about that.
And I think, Mayor Pro Tem, maybe what you were referring to was within the code, sorry, Danielle, I apologize, we may need you still, that there are use-based requirements, right?
Sure.
There are certain uses that then trigger for example, different kinds of buffering and that.
Some of the things that are reviewed during site plan are triggered by either a zoning district or they're triggered by an element of the site. So parking areas, regardless of the zoning district, have screening standards, and those screening standards are a certain level of screening, and it's more to do with what it's next to than the zoning district. So there are standards that are kind of a mixed bag of what triggers what, but they definitely are in the site plan review criteria very clearly to follow.
Thank you for the.
Yeah, I just recalling our last conversation. Yeah, it's not a condition that we are imposing, it's already in the code.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was.
So
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
I was just going to kind of harken back to, the last couple of meetings that we've had. I do just harbor, I mean, first of all, I think we have acknowledged that this will be a park, and I appreciate the care with which that has been reiterated so that we're not equivocating on whether it will be a park, whether it is the Natural Heritage Foundation or the city or whoever, or the county, whoever is managing it, we understand that it will be a legal reality that it is a park. Where I harbor reservations in turning down the zoning in this particular case is that, there is just a half of maybe the smallest border of this piece of land that abuts the property that we're actually talking about, that is the Dane Family Trust property. And so I just think it sets a really difficult precedent if we're saying we can't rely on the standards that are already in the code as far as screening and buffering, and we can't rely on the direction that we've given our staff, and we can't rely on other legal protections like nuisances that give adjacent property owners the ability to say, hey, what you're doing on your property is causing a problem for me. We have recourse for all of, at sort of all of those stages. If we turn it down, even with all of those things in place, I think that's setting a precedent that I'm not comfortable setting. So I very much appreciate the family's concerns, and I know it's the other part of the family that owns, the property that we're talking about to be rezoned, as well as the immediately to the north. So it's a complicated situation. We've spoken to that this is not, a super straightforward decision, but I just wanted to reiterate some of the reasons why I'm not comfortable saying no to this rezoning with everything that we've discussed.
Well, I certainly appreciate Councilor Dunn's concerns, and, I think I myself have expressed how, particularly with the CI1 zoning category, which is kind of one step below industrial zoning, and in the code references in effect that fact that there's a need for special consideration with respect to the impacts generated by a project that's CI1 zoning, and given that as a starting point, it certainly seems to me, as a counselor, it's difficult to be able to effectively respond to what those special needs may be with respect to the buffering of potential impacts. I'm not opposed to the CI1 zoning. I'm sure it's a grab bag of land uses that are allowed under CI1. That in some ways is why it's so difficult to predict what the outcome may be. Some may be very benign, and others may have a significant impact. We just don't know. And so I'm drawn to the idea of deferring. I'm not opposed to the rezoning of CI1, but I do feel that a deferral may help us in being able to better understand how we can address this interface that the rezoning would generate and come up with the most effective remedies.
I just want to thank Councilor Burgess for enumerating the protections that are already there, as well as honestly a trust in our staff to be able to work through the codes as they are written, and to understand as well that there are some recourses as far as nuisance laws, and so she did a much better job of enumerating those. But I have to agree that at the same time, my heart is with the park. I do believe, and I know that, and I'm incredibly happy that the park is a reality. It is there. It's going to happen. But it is one portion of land that all surrounding it is already zoned. And as far as, as Eric pointed out, you don't have to have a plan to have this rezoned. And so as complicated and as emotional, truly, for me, as this has been, I also am very hesitant. Laura talked about it in terms of certain precedents that are already in place that we would be bucking. But I also think that from a really macro view, there are so many components that we would have to play Twister to be able to say, as a council, we need to not attend to those pieces that are already in place to appropriately make sure this land is, to use this land appropriately while respecting adjacent land. I don't think that as a council, as a body, that we should become this granular in dictating exactly what should be happening with a particular piece of land. So I will still be supporting this motion.
Well, the two previous votes, I've made my position quite clear. It's obvious how I feel about this. And as was mentioned, the one major thing that I keep stressing is that we have so many parks, and parks are important in our community, and not a one of them is bordered by intensive commercial. And I just think that that's a bad precedent to set, and it's just not a good thing. And I'm saddened to hear that we can't require a plan, because I do have a problem with understanding that. It seems so open-ended and unpredictable to me. And I mean, I'll liken it to going into a voting booth. You certainly wouldn't go into a voting booth and check the box that says unknown. You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't go to a restaurant and order something from a menu that says unknown or uncertain. So why on earth, with something important like this, would we go into this and vote on something that's unknown? We don't know what it's going to be, or how compatible or not compatible it's going to be with this surrounding beautiful green space that's being given to us. So I'm again going to be voting against it. As far as Councillor Dunn's motion to defer, if it would help us to move along with this and find an effective answer to this that's compatible with all parties involved, I would go along with that.
Go right ahead.
I just want to interject before Councilor Harmsen has an opportunity to speak. I'm sorry, that came off wrong. I don't want to.
You're good.
Thanks. What I wanted to say was this. I can imagine a council conversation about the kind of steps the council can take in order to buffer or shield properties such as the trust property that will be future parks and so forth. I could see the value in that. However, I'm struggling to see the value of a deferral here, in that even if council has this discussion and comes with a laundry list of conditions, I'm not sure to what vehicle you would adhere them. That is, as we discussed earlier, the conditional zoning agreement, is gone with the closure of the public hearing. I'm not sure how we would impose conditions other than the conditions already required by ordinance in the major site plan review. But if you were to come up with a bunch of different things, all of which would have merit, I'm not sure what we would do with that information. And so I want to make sure that if council wishes to defer, that you would recognize that you might spend some time coming up with what would otherwise be a highly merited list, but I'm not sure what you would do with it. So I don't want to allow council to retain hope that you can impose that, a list of conditions at any point in the future.
May I say it?
Sure.
Yeah, I think, even if we chose not to go with a conditional zoning agreement as a vector for getting these conditions, a deferral would give us time to better understand the protections that exist as they are in a more detailed capacity, as well as, understand what the potential desires of the adjacent landowners are. And, we could potentially address those things by changing the building code, as I understand. Changing the building code or changing the zoning code.
Well, the building code doesn't really relate to the kind of topics that we're discussing. Zoning code could, but unless you impose a moratorium, which we have not done, and I don't think would be appropriate, certainly at this stage of the proceedings, having already voted yes 2 times. So I don't really know that either of those changes would be on the menu.
And why not?
Well, do you want me to follow up on the building code? Do you understand that part of it?
Well, so really what I'm trying to say is, the protections that everyone is talking about already existing. Sorry for my ignorance for where those come from or what those are. But again, acknowledging that I am ignorant to what those things are. What would prevent us from, during a deferral, amending that to ensure that we are satisfied with protections?
Well, I think the answer is because I don't think you can impose a moratorium at this stage of the proceedings is the short answer. And I think that's what would be required for you to kind of move the goalpost, so to speak, in the middle of the game or 2/3 of the way through the game. So I don't think that's an option available to council. Again, let me be clear. I can imagine the value of that conversation on a broader scale. And I know that there's been discussion by council about having staff go ahead and move forward with the district plan amendment as part of the broader comp plan review, and to view the George Dane Trust property as public, and that's all already in the works. It's just the kind of things that we're talking about tonight, I think, that are legally problematic.
I don't know how much this is weighing into my colleagues' decision-making, but I was just curious about the idea of the adjacency of different zoning to parks. So just from pulling up the zoning map while we've been speaking this evening, there is CI1 adjacent to Napoleon Park. There is industrial adjacent to Meskwaki Park and Sturgis Ferry Park, and immediately across the road from Ryerson's Woods and the Johnson County Fairgrounds. So that's just from looking at one place that is closest to this proposal. I think having high-intensity uses adjacent to parks is not something that we don't have.
Yeah, I think I was going to comment on that because I think it's important to point that out. We do have very high-intensity uses next to actually some of our most beloved parks. If you think about Terry Trueblood Recreation Area, to the north of that sits our Public Works campus. That would be, if it not zoned public, would be an industrial type of zoning. Across the street from that same park, you have S&G Materials, which would definitely be an industrial type of use. You even have industrial next to Mercer Park across the railroad tracks. You have an industrial that will be adjacent to the future East Side Sports Complex that's been planned. And then you also have what would be industrial next to Waterworks Prairie Park and Kicker Soccer Park in our wastewater plant and our water treatment facility. And you have a lot of other, heavy, what I would consider intense uses right next to parks, right? I-80 goes by a number of our parks, including some of our kind of natural areas. Waterworks Prairie Park, Hunter's Run Park is along 280. So parks can exist next to intensive uses and still be very much enjoyed and heavily used by the community.
I don't have a whole lot more to add. I think that Councilors Burgess and Alter sort of gave us a nice recap of what we've already discussed in previous meetings, and what I said in previous meetings, I have nothing really to add to that.
Okay. So I've not really, I mean, I've heard talk about a possible proposal for deferment, but I haven't heard a motion for deferment.
I will move.
So moved by Dunn.
Claire, do you, deferring to a date certain, do you have a date?
Let's say, 2 meetings prior, the next, not next meeting, but the meeting next, whatever that would be.
So that is
I'll second that.
moved by Dunn, seconded by
June 20th.
Thomas.
Okay. To June 20th, for the record.
I think we'll just do roll call, please.
Yep.
And this is for the deferment?
Sure.
Until June 20th.
All right.
So
No
that's
need
what
for
we're,
council discussion on that motion? Okay.
council discussion?
Well, one thing I would say is, just in listening, I think it is interesting to hear that there are, in fact, parks in Iowa City which are adjacent to CI1. One potential use of the deferment would, in my mind, be looking at those sites and trying to get an understanding of how that adjacency has been addressed to ensure the impacts of that zoning have been mitigated, so that the park experience is left whole. I'm a strong supporter of looking at existing at precedents of examples of where you have the interface similar to what we're talking about now, which could help inform the process that we're looking at being in place should we support the rezoning.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to give a procedural. I just clarified. So this is going to be a vote for the deferment until June 20th. If that passes, then it'll be deferred until June 20th. If it fails, then the original motion to pass and adopt, we would vote on that. So I just wanted to let people know what that procedure will look like. Any other comments?
So I guess one of my questions is in the years, to press a pause, to be able to learn more about what kinds of conditions, not ones that we would impose, but ones that already accompany certain uses, right? Is that what, that's...
That's what John just said.
Okay. Well, I certainly I understood when you were talking about the adjacency of how these existing parks mitigated that, or
Right.
how they
was
became
the-
good neighbors to one another.
What was the
essentially.
relationship between the park use and the CI1 use, whatever
Right.
that may be?
And then I thought I understood, and so correct me if I'm wrong, that you were interested in getting more clarity about what the certain types of uses of buildings, what the accompanying conditions already in the code are.
Yes.
Such as I'm remembering from a couple of years before I was actually on council, but the area where Paul's is or was, and now it's Harbor Freight, that there wasn't enough light shelter, right, that it was coming over. So it's things like that. So you want to pause to be able to find out more about what those types of things are.
Yeah, pause to find out more about those things, being able to present those to our adjacent property owners, whether or not we're going to vote it up or down. I don't think, and I would make it very clear that in my deferral is not an indication of a lack of support. I just think that we should do a duty when we have procedurally tied ourselves from being able to look into this, or pardon me, being able to add conditions that I would personally support. I think it behooves us to not take that opportunity. And again, it's not a yes or no to the actual proposal. It just gives us some time to go into this just a little bit deeper.
Yeah. I recall Danielle, actually, I think it was at one of these meetings, talking, maybe that was the first one, thank you, about what the conditions, the built-ins were for code when it was heavy, presumably a car lot, essentially, since we were looking at neighboring businesses. And so, yeah.
And I'd just like to add, that's something we do as staff on a daily basis. People call and they ask questions about what might happen on this property next to us. We walk through the code and we can explain those code provisions. It doesn't necessarily have to be done at this table if it's not going to and it really can't influence your vote. We're happy to do that with any property owner in town.
Are we ready for a vote? Roll call, please.
Motion to defer, correct?
Motion to defer. Right. Teague?
No.
Thomas?
Yes.
Alter?
No.
Burgess?
No.
Dunn?
Yes.
Harmson?
No.
Taylor?
Yes.
Motion fails 4-3. We're on to motion to pass and adopt. Any more further comments? Roll call, please.
Thomas?
No.
Alter?
Yes.
Burgess?
Yes.
Dunn?
No.
Harmson?
Yes.
Taylor?
No.
Teague?
Yes, motion passes 4-3. And I want to thank everybody for coming out for this item. We're going to move on to 11A, which is a transit funding application. This is a resolution authorizing the filing of an application with the Iowa Department of Transportation for fiscal year 2024 state transit assistance and Federal Transit Administration funding. I'm going to open the public hearing, and I'm going to invite Darian back up. Well, from earlier.
Good evening, Mayor, Council.
Welcome again.
I first wanted to let you know that and make you aware that there are updated funding numbers in a late handout. So please draw your attention towards that. The resolution before you tonight is for our consolidated transit funding application. It is an annual application filed with the Iowa Department of Transportation, listing all the capital and operating expenses for which the city seeks funding from the Iowa DOT and the Federal Transit Administration. The projects contained in the application have been programmed into the Iowa City Transit for FTA Section 5307, 5310, and 5339 funding for FY24. The projects will be included in the FY24 Iowa DOT Consolidated Transit Funding Application and the MPO JC, the Metropolitan Planning Organization of Johnson County's Transportation Improvement Program. Iowa City Transit may not seek funding for all of these projects. However, these projects need to be listed in this document in order to become eligible for federal funding. The total amount of the projects, the funding being requested, is approximately $30 million. Specifically, the specific allocations are for State Transit Assistance Program. We're requesting $692,000. For federal operating assistance for transit, that's our 5307 funding. It's $2.95 million for federal funds for transit in non-urbanized areas or for transit serving primarily elderly persons or persons with disabilities. This goes to help support our Johnson County seats paratransit services. The funding request is $177,000. And last but not least, the statewide federal capital assistance for transit, which would be 5339 funding, which would come through grant awards, would be approximately $30 million. These funds include all of the capital projects that Iowa City Transit wishes to see funded. So this includes replacement and relocation of the transit facility. That's a big ticket item. Electric bus replacements and bus shelters. And typically, local match is required for any of those federal funding awards.
Any questions?
Terry, and I do have to ask on the late handout, I just want to make sure I'm understanding. In the first paragraph, there's a summary, and it says the last sentence, the total amount of funds being requested in the funding application is approximately, and then there's the number replacement, and that should be the sum of all of these? Or just because it looks like that's just the statewide federal capital assistance. Should that be like 34 million instead of 30?
So you're correct. So the total funding, that should probably read, to be accurate, the funding request for the competitive grant funding applications is really what that should read. You're correct. So in total, the total would be the $30 million, which is the competitive grant funding request or the eligibility for federal grant funding. And then you're correct, the 609, that would be in addition to the 692,000 for state transit assistant, the 2.9 million
Got
for
it.
our federal operating, and then the 177 for 5310.
Thank you.
Yes,
And I
thank you
will
for
say,
that.
as my entering the fourth year and serving on NPO also, it's all finally making sense.
I look forward to that in 3 years.
All right, thank you. Anyone from the public like to address this topic? Please come forth. Seeing no one online or in person, I'm going to close the public hearing. Could I get a motion to approve, please?
And just, well, I'm sorry to interrupt. Just so we're clear, we're talking about approving the revised resolution that it was in the late handout, just so we're clear for the public.
Yes.
Updated numbers. So moved. Harmson.
Second, Burgess.
Council discussion. Roll call, please.
Alter,
Yes.
Burgess,
Yes.
Dunn,
Yes.
Harmson,
Yes.
Taylor,
Yes.
Teague,
Yes.
Thomas.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Item number 11B, utility rate public hearing, ordinance amending Title III entitled City Finances, Taxation and Fees, Chapter 4 entitled Schedule of Fees, Rates, Charges, Bonds, Fines, and Penalties of the City Code to increase or change charges and fees. Could I get a motion to pass and adopt?
So moved. Done.
Second, Alter.
Anyone from the public like to address this topic? Seeing no one online or in person, council discussion. Roll call, please.
Burgess,
Yes.
Dunn,
Yes.
Harmson,
Yes.
Taylor,
Yes.
Teague,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Alter.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Item 11C, solid waste services fees, resolution adopting the fees for solid waste services for items left on the public right-of-way and rescinding resolution number 10-138. Can I get a motion to approve, please?
So moved, Burgess.
Second, Alter.
All right, and we're going to bring up Ron. Welcome.
Good evening. This is a resolution that is adjusting our 24-hour tag procedure fees. These fees have not been adjusted since 2010. So for the kind of the minimum charge would increase from $70.50 to $76.50. This does not include the charge for the actual item. So if they would leave a appliance, a mattress, there's also a $20 charge that would be a part of that 24-hour tag piece. So this is just the fees for our staff to go out and pick it up. So if they don't call in and schedule a pickup, it's observed on the right of way, it's tagged, our fee is increased by $6 for that process.
And it goes to whoever the property owner is listed?
Correct.
All right, any other questions or comments? Well, questions. Thank you. Anyone from the public like to address this topic? Seeing no one in person or online, council discussion. Roll call, please.
Dunn,
Yes.
Harmson,
Yes.
Taylor,
Yes.
Teague,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Alter,
Yes.
Burgess.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Item 12 is announcements of vacancies new. 12A is the ad hoc Truth and Reconciliation Commission, 2 vacancies to fill unexpired terms upon appointment through December 31st, 2024. Council correspondence included council packet. Traore resigned during the item 9C of the May 2nd, 2023 City Council meeting. Human Rights Commission, 1 vacancy to fill an unexpired term upon appointment through December 31st, 2025. Correspondence included in council packet. Can I get a motion to accept correspondence?
So moved, Taylor.
Second, Alter.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Announcements of vacancies previous. Airport 13A, Airport Commission, 1 vacancy to fill a 4-year term. Community Police Review Board, 1 vacancy to fill a 4-year term. Historic Preservation Commission at large, 2 vacancies to fill a 3-year term. Historic Preservation Commission Longfellow, 1 vacancy to fill a 3-year term. Historic Preservation Commission North Side, 1 vacancy to fill a 3-year term. Housing and Community Development Commission, 3 vacancies to fill a 3-year term. Library Board of Trustees, 2 vacancies to fill a 6-year term. Planning and Zoning Commission, 2 vacancies to fill 5-year terms. Planning and Zoning Commission, 1 vacancy to fill an unexpired term upon appointment. Public Art Advisory Committee, 2 vacancies, 1 at large and 1 art or design professional to fill 3-year terms. Applications must be received by 5 p.m. Tuesday, May 30th, 2023. Historic Preservation Commission, East College Street, 1 vacancy to fill an unexpired term. Historic Preservation Commission, Jefferson Street, 1 vacancy to fill a 3-year term. Historic Preservation Commission, Woodlawn Avenue, 1 vacancy to fill an unexpired term. Vacancies will remain open until filled. We're at item number 14, City Council information.
I just have a small piece that 2 weekends ago, there was a great 5K in the riverfront crossings of Girls on the Run, which is wonderful national nonprofit that has a really strong local Iowa contingent, and it's for girls from grades 3 through 8, where they undergo I think roughly 8 weeks of training, 6 weeks to 8 weeks of training to run and or walk a 5K, but along with it, it's about confidence building, collaboration, self-esteem, and it is pretty freaking spectacular to have seen all of those girls and their run buddies and families. The energy was fantastic, and it's a fantastic place to hold the 5K. So I just give a big shout out to that organization here in Eastern Iowa. They had a great representation through the Iowa City School District, and just congratulations to all the girls and their families and friends who attended and ran.
Congrats to all of our University of Iowa graduates who graduated just over the last weekend. So if they're watching, well done.
I'm sure they are.
All of them. You can give our regards.
Graduation requirement.
All right. We'll move on to item number 15, report on items from city staff, city manager's office.
Nothing tonight.
Our city attorney.
Nothing for me. Thank you.
And acting in the role as our city clerk.
Nothing for me.
All right. Well, thanks for all you've done for this meeting.
Yes.
Yes. Item number 16, adjournment. Could I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Taylor, seconded by Burgess. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. We are adjourned.